cool twilight breeze sweeps across the jagged spine of the Yanshan Mountains, carrying with it the delicate resinous scent of wild pine, crushed juniper needles, and the deeply settled dust of ancient earth. Imagine yourself standing on a high, remote ridge, just as the sun begins its slow descent below the horizon, casting a soft, bruised purple and burnt orange glow across the endless expanse of the sky. The fading light catches gently on a ribbon of stone that stretches endlessly into the distance, undulating and weaving, dipping gracefully into plunging shadowy valleys and rising up impossibly steep craggy peaks. The heavy grey stones beneath your feet are warmed by the lingering memory of the daylight, radiating a gentle, comforting heat against the rapidly cooling evening air. The silence up here at the top of the world is profound and encompassing. It is not an empty, hollow silence, but rather a heavy, quiet presence, the majestic sound of centuries at deep rest. The wind whispers softly through the narrow arrow slits and brushes rhythmically over the crenelated parapets, creating a low, continuous sigh that has sung exactly the same calming note for hundreds of years. You're standing on the very edge of the world, comfortably suspended between the deepening oceanic blue of the twilight sky and the emerald, velvety shadows of the ancient forest below. As we drift slowly along this vast, sleeping dragon of stone, let your own mind begin to mirror the absolute stillness of the mountains. You do not need to hold on to any of the historical details, the dates, or the facts you're about to hear. There is no test waiting for you at the end of this journey, no need to try to memorize, no effort required at all. Let your mind soften, releasing its tight grip on the lingering threads and stresses of the waking day. Let these ideas, these quiet, beautiful fragments of history, drift through your awareness like the evening mist settling gently into the low valleys. What stays in your memory stays naturally, wrapping around your consciousness like a heavy, warm blanket. What fades quietly into the night, dissolving to make room for deep, restorative, uninterrupted rest. You're entirely safe to let go. You're simply a peaceful passenger on this journey, gliding smoothly over ancient, rolling terrain, absorbing the calm, steady, unshakable endurance of the stones. Close your eyes, or simply let your gaze soften. Breathe deeply and listen to the slow, steady heartbeat of the past. As we glide weightlessly along the crest of the mountains, tracing the long, winding silhouette of this massive structure, it becomes beautifully clear that what we're looking at is not a single, unbroken, monotonous line. The mind often pictures one solitary wall marching uniformly and rigidly across the Asian continent, but the reality is far more intricate, deeply organic, and strangely more beautiful. It is not a single, isolated barrier, but a vast, overlapping dynamic network, closely resembling the delicate branching veins of a fallen autumn leaf, or the weaving silvery tributaries of a great quiet river moving toward the sea. Over the expansive span of more than 2,000 years, different dynasties added their own unique brushstrokes to the vast landscape. Some architects built robust, towering fortresses of heavy, kiln-fired grey brick, while others, in the far western reaches, sculpted great sleeping mounds from rammed earth, desert sand and woven willow reeds, blending the structure perfectly into the arid, windswept steppes. There are deep trenches carved into the earth, natural rushing river barriers utilised as defences, and parallel walls that run alongside each other like silent companions on a long journey, separated by miles of wild, untamed terrain. This realization gently transforms the wall in our minds from a rigid, harsh boundary into a living, breathing system, an organic web of history that adapted, shifted, and breathed over millennia in harmony with the shifting contours of the earth. And what quietly binds this incredible, enduring web together across the centuries is perhaps one of the most gentle, domestic, and surprising secrets of ancient engineering. If you were to walk along the parapets and trace your fingers along the narrow pale seams set between the heavy, rough-hewn grey bricks of the grand Ming Dynasty sections, you would be touching the remnants of a recipe that sounds more like a comforting evening meal than a rigid, industrial mortar. To create a bond strong enough to withstand the devastating forces of centuries of freezing winters, torrential summer rains, and shifting tectonic plates beneath the earth, the builders mixed traditional, crushed slaked lime with something entirely organic and deeply nourishing: the sweet, thick, starchy soup of boiled, sticky rice. The amylopectin hidden within the rice, which is a highly complex carbohydrate, created an intricate microscopic matrix when it combined with the calcium carbonate of the lime. This brilliant, quiet organic chemistry formed a mortar that was not rigidly brittle or prone to shattering, but remarkably resilient, stubbornly enduring, and beautifully slightly flexible. It is a deeply calming and beautiful thought that a simple, nourishing grain, grown quietly in the flooded, sun-drenched, terraced paddies of the valleys below, is the very substance holding these monumental mountainside fortresses together against the slow, grinding test of time. Because of this resilient, forgiving bond, the sprawling structure was able to perform its most breathtaking architectural feat, completely surrendering to and becoming a natural extension of the mountains themselves. The ancient architect of this sprawling network possessed a deep, almost reverent understanding of the landscape they were working within. They did not try to arrogantly conquer the terrain, nor did they attempt to carve harsh, straight, unnatural lines through the earth with brute force. Instead, they gracefully allowed the sweeping topography to dictate their winding path. The stone pathway dances along the absolute highest, most precipitous ridges, balancing perfectly on narrow rocky crests and plunging smoothly down into the deep, sweeping saddles of the earth, wholly embracing the natural geology. Where sheer, impossibly steep, impassable cliffs offered their own magnificent defence, the builders simply stopped their work, allowing the raw, jagged mountain rock to become the wall itself, before quietly picking up the thread of brick again on the other side of the chasm. This harmonious, respectful collaboration between human hands and the massive, ancient tectonic forces of the earth created a profound sense of aesthetic balance and peace. It feels infinitely less like an aggressive imposition on nature, and far more like a heavy jewelled crown resting gently and naturally upon the quiet head of the wilderness. From these high, crowning vantage points scattered rhythmically along the winding forested ridges stand the solitary, magnificent watchtowers. In the quiet, ink-black depths of the night, or the still, heavily misty mornings of antiquity, these heavy stone towers served as the glowing nodes of an incredibly elegant, completely silent communication system. Long before the chaotic invention of modern, buzzing signals, a vital message could travel across thousands of miles in a mere matter of hours, moving swiftly and cleanly at the sheer speed of light and shadow. In the bright daytime, solitary signalmen would carefully burn a precise mixture of wolf dung and dried, fragrant herbs, creating a dense, impossibly straight, dark pillar of smoke that would pierce the high sky without being easily scattered by the mountain wind. At night, the deep, enveloping darkness of the mountains was rhythmically punctuated by the warm, flickering amber glow of great lanterns and signal fires, passed from tower to tower like a magnificent slow-motion relay of falling stars. The men stationed in these remote outposts lived a life of profound quiet, patience, and observation, spending their endless nights watching the vast, silent expanse, waiting calmly for a spark in the distance, deeply and invisibly connected to a brother they would never meet, miles away in the comforting dark. Over the slow, graceful passing of countless unhurried seasons, those once manned watchtowers and quiet, patrolling walkways have slowly been completely embraced by the very wilderness they once sought to carefully observe. The rigid stone structure has steadily become a magnificent, winding, high-altitude sanctuary for the natural world. If you look closely at the weathered, gently crumbling stone in the quieter, forgotten sections, you will see life quietly, persistently taking root. Tiny seeds carried by wandering high-altitude winds or dropped by migrating flocks of birds centuries ago have found incredibly safe harbour in the crumbling ancient sticky rice mortar. Today, delicate pale wild apricots and soft blushing mountain peaches bloom vividly against the stern rough grey bricks. Gnarled ancient pine trees twist gracefully from seemingly impossible, gravity-defying angles, their strong rough roots acting like gentle, exploring fingers, weaving slowly through the ancient masonry. The immense defensive structure has fundamentally transformed into an elongated, deeply peaceful botanical garden stretching across a continent. It is a beautiful, deeply reassuring reminder of how softly, quietly and patiently nature inevitably reclaims what is left to the elements, wrapping the hard, sharp edges of human history in a soft, heavy blanket of rich green moss, trailing leafy vines and fragile, fragrant pale blossoms. This living, breathing blanket of nature means that the aesthetic experience of the wall is never truly static. It is a magnificent, miles-long canvas that completely and wonderfully reinvents itself with the slow, rhythmic turning of the Earth's axis. In the deep, humid warmth of the summer months, the surrounding rolling mountains erupt in an overwhelming, vibrant ocean of emerald jade and deep forest green, making the pale, winding stone pop brilliantly like a clean chalk line drawn gracefully across a lush tapestry. As the air eventually cools and the crisp relief of autumn gently settles in, the deep valleys transform into a breathtaking, fiery, quiet display of burnt crimson, deep, rich amber, and brilliant shimmering gold, reflecting the fading golden warmth of the year. But perhaps the most profound, deeply settling stillness arrives with the quiet onset of winter. When the heavy, silent, thick snows fall steadily over the northern provinces, the vast structure becomes an ethereal, pristine ribbon of pure white, winding silently through a monochrome, minimalist landscape of stark, sleeping trees and dark rock. The thick snow beautifully insulates the heavy parapets, absorbing and dampening every stray sound, creating a vast, echoing hush that seems to stretch peacefully across the entire continent, gently inviting the entire world into a deep, frozen, restful slumber. Even within this hushed, snow-covered landscape, specific, isolated sections reveal a staggering, deeply touching dedication to delicate beauty that goes far beyond any mere military function. In the remote, beautifully preserved winding stretches like Jinshanling, one can find intricate architectural details that speak to a profound, quiet care for craftsmanship and art. Here, the heavy watchtowers are not simply utilitarian, square boxes, but elegant multi-storied pavilions with intricately carved lintels, arched windows, and gracefully, gently sloping roofs perfectly designed to shed the heavy, drumming monsoon rains. In the early quiet hours of the morning, when a thick, pristine, white inversion layer of cool fog settles deeply into the plunging valleys, these high towers appear to be completely detached from the earth below, floating serenely and silently on a vast sea of white mist. Standing perfectly still on what feels entirely like a terrace made of clouds, comfortably suspended high above the waking world, one can deeply appreciate the quiet, steady pride of the ancient masons who, even in such punishing, lonely isolation, took the unhurried time to carve delicate, curling floral motifs and rolling clouds into the heavy stone, leaving a permanent, beautiful signature of art, patience, and humanity in the untamed wild. This incredible ribbon of ancient art and weathered stone, after winding its patient way through vast deserts, sweeping plains, and sheer, jagged mountain ranges, eventually finds its quiet resting place at the absolute edge of the sea. Far to the east, at a place poetically and beautifully named Shanhaiguan, the sprawling heavy architecture finally meets the endless rhythmic blue motion of the Bohai Sea. The very final, heavy stone watchtower, affectionately known as the Old Dragon's Head, is not built to look fiercely over the land, but rather wades gently and calmly down into the salty, frothing surf. Here, the immovable, silent, heavy permanence of ancient rock gracefully meets the chaotic, eternal, constantly fluid energy of the sweeping ocean. The cool, white-crested waves crash and wash continuously over the massive square granite foundation blocks, endlessly, gently smoothing and polishing the ancient stone. It is a deeply calming, uniquely peaceful place, standing right at the beautiful boundary where human endeavour simply, quietly stops, humbly acknowledging the vast, unstoppable boundary of the water. The low rushing sound of the tide pulling back over the smoothed pebbles provides a constant rhythmic breathing, a natural eternal lullaby at the quiet end of a 1,000-mile, centuries-long journey. If you were to stand quietly on the heavy stones of the Old Dragon's Head at the stroke of midnight, turning your gaze away from the dark, whispering water and looking up into the immense, beautifully unobstructed night sky, you would be sharing a profound view that has remained entirely, perfectly unchanged since the very first foundational stones were laid in the earth. Far away from the bright, artificial glow of modern, bustling cities, the vast night sky above the northern, winding sections of the wall is a majestic canopy of absolute velvety deep space darkness, heavily and brilliantly dusted with the shimmering silver cloudy band of the Milky Way galaxy. The quiet, solitary guards who paced these very stones thousands of years ago navigated their long, lonely nights by watching the slow, majestic, calming rotation of the Big Dipper as it circled the steadfast, unmoving North Star. They patiently tracked the gentle passing of the deep, quiet hours by the slow movement of the pale moon across the stone parapets, watching the dark shadows stretch, warp, and slowly recede. There is a profound, deep comfort in realizing that while vast empires have risen and faded like the seasons, the glittering, silent map above remains an absolute constant, a shared, beautiful ceiling of wonder connecting us directly, intimately to the quiet, patient observers of the ancient past. Ultimately, the most magnificent, deeply comforting truth about this sprawling, endlessly winding monument is its gentle, continuous relationship with the vast concept of time itself. It is not just a static, frozen object resting heavily on the earth. It is a slow, gracefully unfolding, beautifully continuous process. Every single, soft raindrop that gently smooths its hard edges, every microscopic grain of pale sand carried by the sweeping Gobi wind that slowly polishes its baked bricks, and every slow, creeping, determined root of a mountain pine adds a new, quiet sentence to its ongoing story. It quietly teaches us the beautiful, necessary art of deep patience. Standing motionless amidst its crumbling, enduring majesty, human time, our rushing busy days, our fleeting temporary worries, feels incredibly brief, delightfully light, and easily manageable. Yet, at the exact same moment, the incredible fact that gentle, persistent human hands could shape the hard earth on such an unimaginably vast, beautifully enduring scale proves that our quiet, steady, persistent efforts can leave a beautiful, lasting mark on the world. It openly invites a deep, resting, cellular peace, a profound sense of belonging to a gentle timeline far, far greater than our own, a gentle, whispering reminder that we, too, can endure, we can adapt, and eventually, we can completely, safely find our rest. As you let that profound, resting peace settle into the heavy muscles of your shoulders and the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing, imagine lifting your perspective even higher, soaring effortlessly far above the ancient stones. Ascend through the cool, wispy layers of high-altitude cirrus clouds, up into the magnificent, echoing quiet of the stratosphere, until the sky deepens from pale blue into the absolute star-dusted velvet of deep space. It is a deeply romanticized whisper of history that this long, twisting ribbon of stone is the only human creation visible from the dark, soundless vacuum of space. But when astronauts float in the silent cupolas of their ships, gazing down at the swirling blue and white marble of our sleeping home, the wall is actually entirely invisible to the naked human eye. It does not slash across the beautiful, sprawling continents like a harsh, unnatural scar. Instead, because it was lovingly forged from the very clay, crushed soil, and deep bedrock of the mountains upon which it rests, it perfectly, seamlessly camouflages itself within the Earth's own natural textures. It is a beautiful, deeply humbling realization. Even our most monumental, seemingly arrogant architectural triumphs are ultimately swallowed by the breathtaking scale of the planet. We are merely quiet artists painting temporarily with the Earth's own ancient palette, our greatest works dissolving back into the sweeping, majestic canvas of the globe when viewed from the quiet heavens. Let us drift softly down from that profound celestial silence, following the invisible, comforting pull of gravity back to the rugged Earth, gliding far to the arid, golden west. In this vast expanse, the landscape shifts dramatically from dense, humid, emerald pine forests to the sweeping, silent, undulating oceans of the Gobi Desert. Here, the wall entirely sheds its familiar rigid skin of grey, kiln-fired brick. The ancient Han Dynasty builders, working in a stark landscape devoid of heavy stone and thick timber, became brilliant alchemists of the desert. They constructed their sprawling barriers using the only modest materials the barren earth graciously offered: pale, golden sand, coarse river gravel, and the resilient, fibrous branches of the red willow and fragrant tamarisk shrubs. Layer upon patient layer, they laid down these tightly woven mats of desert flora, packing the loose earth incredibly tightly between them, creating a massive undulating earthen mound that literally baked to the ringing hardness of thick ceramic beneath the blazing ancient sun. It is a profound, deeply settling testament to human adaptability, an awe-inspiring structure born entirely of the desert sand, designed to gracefully withstand the fierce howling winds of the steppes, not by stubbornly resisting them, but by being born directly from them, a true organic child of the sweeping dunes. Through these golden, sun-baked earthen walls passed something far more delicate, enduring, and valuable than passing armies. They guarded and nurtured the shimmering lifeline of the ancient world. At the far western terminus, the towering, heavily fortified structure of Shanhaiguan stands like a silent sentinel between the safe edge of the known empire and the vast, mysterious wilds of the desert. It was right here, passing slowly through the heavily shadowed, deep-arched gates, that the legendary Silk Road funneled its unimaginable treasures. If you quiet your busy mind and listen closely to the sweeping desert wind, you might almost hear the faint, melodic, metallic chiming of heavy brass camel bells echoing softly through the drifting snow of the high mountain passes. Exhausted caravans carrying impossibly soft bolts of vividly dyed spun silk, perfectly smooth green jade, and intensely fragrant sacks of crushed cinnamon, star anise, and cloves sought deep, restful shelter within its massive embrace. The wall was not merely a static, unyielding boundary designed exclusively to keep the chaotic world out. It was a carefully guarded, warmly pulsing artery that allowed the rich, intoxicating lifeblood of culture, intricate art, and warming spices to flow safely across a beautifully dangerous world. There is absolutely no need for you to carry the heavy weight of those unimaginably long ancient journeys, or to mentally pack the heavy leather saddles of those exhausted caravans. Your only gentle task right now is to let the slow, rhythmic swaying of those distant chiming bells guide your own breathing, allowing the physical body to grow heavier and sink deeper into the mattress, allowing the mind to simply drift through the cool desert night, feeling perfectly safe, beautifully untethered, and completely at peace. As we allow the dry, golden desert to gently fade from our minds and return smoothly to the steep, densely forested, misty ridges of the Ming Dynasty brickwork. The ancient architecture reveals a recently uncovered, deeply intimate and wonderfully quiet secret. For centuries, modern historians and casual observers alike believed these towering, imposing stone fortifications were a solid, impenetrable, completely unbroken shield of masonry. Yet, hidden completely in plain sight, seamlessly and masterfully integrated into the sprawling, complex geometric patterns of the grey brickwork, dedicated archaeologists have recently discovered over 100 perfectly concealed miniature secret doors. These tiny, beautifully camouflaged arched gates were so brilliantly designed to match the surrounding, weathered masonry that, from the outside looking in, they were magically invisible to the naked human eye. They were quiet, secret portals used by light-footed ancient scouts slipping softly into the mist-shrouded valleys, or, more peacefully, by local shepherds who were granted quiet, unrecorded permission to lead their fluffy white flocks through the intimidating stone to graze lazily on the sweet, untouched mountain grasses. This incredible discovery beautifully changes the feeling of the wall entirely, softly transforming a monolithic, unyielding barrier into a living structure full of secret, whispering doorways, hidden passages, and soft, unexpected openings that allowed the simple, quiet, daily rhythms of rural life to pass through completely unnoticed. Imagine slipping quietly, almost invisibly, through one of those hidden narrow archways, stepping softly out of the cool, damp mountain mist and into the dry, sheltered, beautifully silent interior of a heavy stone watchtower. As your eyes adjust gently to the soft, dim blue light, filtering slowly through the narrow, angled arrow slits, look directly down at the smooth, worn, heavy granite floorboards beneath your feet. There, etched faintly and patiently into the unyielding cold stone by the sharp tips of ancient bronze spears or heavy iron knives, you will find the delicate, beautifully precise geometric grids of traditional ancient Chinese board games, such as Liubo or an early quiet form of chess. In the long, unimaginably quiet, deeply stretching hours between the passing of entire seasons, the solitary soldiers stationed in these lonely, sky-high, wind-swept outposts sought the simple, comforting, desperately needed warmth of human connection and distraction. By the soft, flickering, dancing orange light of a small smoking tallow candle, wrapped tightly in heavy, coarse sheepskin coats against the biting, unforgiving winter chill, they huddled closely together over these carved stones, rolling small wooden dice and moving smooth, polished river pebbles. It is a deeply beautiful, profoundly humanizing, softly glowing detail, a quiet, lingering echo of camaraderie, gentle, hushed laughter, and the universal, timeless human desire to peacefully pass the quiet, dark hours in the warm, reassuring company of a friend. Just outside the warm, flickering, intimate safety of that quiet watchtower, imagine the heavy, deeply bruised purple clouds of a sudden summer monsoon gathering thickly over the jagged mountain peaks, eventually unleashing a sudden, magnificent, drumming deluge of heavy rain. But the ancient wall does not fear the overwhelming rush of water. It was masterfully, perfectly designed to dance with it. The ancient, brilliant architects intuitively understood that water, pooling silently and seeping invisibly into the heavy earthen foundations, was a far greater, more insidious threat than any passing aggressive army. And so, they designed an incredibly elegant, highly efficient drainage system fed entirely by gravity. Along the very edges of the high stone walkways, gently sloping, carefully and precisely carved stone channels quickly gather the rushing, pooling rainwater. These smooth channels lead directly to beautifully sculpted stone spouts, often carved by master masons into the fierce shapes of mythological beasts, heavy-browed dragons, or elegant extending geometric flumes that reach far out over the sheer, plunging edges of the parapets. When the heavy drumming rains fall, the entire winding length of the wall transforms into a magnificent miles-long cascading fountain, casting thousands of glittering silver arcs of clean water safely away from the ancient vulnerable foundations, allowing the entire massive structure to shed the storm beautifully and emerge clean, washed, and brilliantly renewed in the damp, sweet-smelling fog of the resulting morning. Imagine that cool, beautifully cleansing rain washing gently over the heavy grey stones, carrying away all the accumulated heavy dust of the long, dry season. In that exact same effortless, natural way, let every long, slow, deep exhale you take wash away any lingering, stubborn tension hidden deep in your own muscles and joints. Absolutely nothing needs to be held too tightly. Just let the quiet, imagined sound of the falling water carry it all softly, gently away into the deep green valley far below. As the rhythmic sound of the rain softly fades, the heavy white mist gently parts to reveal a much older, infinitely quieter, deeply resting ghost of the wall, located far to the warmer south, resting gently in the lush, rolling, fertile hills of Henan province. Long before the grand, sweeping, imposing stone dragons of the Ming Dynasty ever existed in the minds of emperors, the very first foundational whispers of this colossal, continent-spanning project were spoken by the ancient state of Chu over 2.5 millennia ago. This original, deeply ancient barrier, known quietly as the Square Wall, looks absolutely nothing like the towering sharp-edged fortresses of our modern dramatic imagination. It is an incredibly humble, quiet, gently sloping low mound of earth, packed tightly with rough, unhewn, rounded fieldstones, and completely, beautifully overgrown by thick, vibrant layers of emerald moss, trailing, delicate ferns, and the tangled, reaching, protective roots of ancient, broad-leafed, deciduous trees. It does not loudly demand attention or project power, but rather rests sleepily and comfortably in the landscape, a soft, undulating, organic ripple in the forest floor. It is a deeply peaceful, profoundly comforting reminder that every massive, world-changing endeavour always begins with a single, humble, deeply earthbound step, and that over the vast, unimaginable stretches of deep time, the sharpest, most ambitious edges of human effort are always softened, rounded, and gently, lovingly reclaimed by the patient, enduring earth. Today, these quietly decaying, deeply forgotten, deeply peaceful sections of the ancient walls have inadvertently and beautifully become one of the most vital, heavily protected and undisturbed sanctuaries for the natural breathing world. Because they stretch completely continuously for thousands of miles through impossibly remote, fiercely undisturbed and largely inaccessible craggy mountain ranges, they have organically formed a massive, unbroken, elevated corridor for wandering wildlife. In the absolute crystal-clear stillness of the early blue dawn, long before the sun has even broken the distant horizon, a rare, incredibly nimble, shy creature known as the Chinese goral, a beautiful, sturdy, grey-coated animal resembling a perfect, delicate cross between a wild mountain goat and a forest antelope, might step lightly and cautiously onto the crumbling, moss-covered ancient bricks. With impossibly delicate, incredibly precise, soft-clicking hooves, it navigates the dizzying, sheer, plunging drops and ruined, roofless watchtowers with effortless, breathtaking, silent grace, using the ancient human-made stone path to travel safely and freely far above the dense, tangled, impenetrable underbrush of the deep forest below. The wall has beautifully, completely surrendered its original harsh purpose of strict division, transforming entirely into an elevated, deeply peaceful, protective bridge, connecting fragmented wild habitats and offering a quiet, heavily guarded, silent safe haven for the shyest, most delicate creatures of the sleeping mountains. If we were to silently follow the invisible path of those delicate, clicking hooves far enough, moving gracefully from the wet, deep green mountains back toward the deeply arid, continuously shifting golden dunes of the vast northwest, we would encounter a natural phenomenon that borders on pure auditory magic. Near the sprawling, crumbling earthen sections of the ancient wall in Dunhuang, the massive, towering golden dunes are beautifully poetically known as the Singing Sands. Because of the unique, perfectly spherical microscopic shape of the individual, dry quartz sand grains, and the specific hollow echoing resonance of the ancient rammed earth fortifications that weave heavily through them, the sweeping desert wind literally plays the entire landscape like a vast, deeply tuned wooden instrument. When the steady, cool evening breeze sweeps gracefully across the sharp, curving crests of the dunes and brushes smoothly against the weathered, ancient earthen walls, it creates an incredibly low, resonant, vibrating, powerful hum. It sounds exactly like the slow, deliberate drawing of a heavily rosined horsehair bow across the thick, lowest, rumbling strings of a massive wooden cello, a deep, continuous, incredibly soothing vibration that you can literally feel resonating softly and warmly in the very center of your own chest. The desert is literally singing itself into a deep sleep, a deeply harmonious, vast geological lullaby that has echoed flawlessly through the dry, incredibly starlit valleys since the very dawn of recorded ancient time. As that low, resonant, beautiful, rumbling note echoes outward and slowly, gently fades into the vast purple expanse of the deepening twilight, we are beautifully, profoundly reminded that the wall does not always announce itself with towering, rigid, arrogant grandeur. In many incredibly remote, deeply quiet, rarely visited stretches of the vast northern steppes, the once mighty, seemingly invincible structure gracefully diminishes to something impossibly humble and deeply touching. It slowly drops in height, stone by weathered stone, until it is merely a low, knee-high, gently rolling grass-covered ridge, a faint, incredibly subtle crease in the endless, waving, silver-tipped ocean of tall, wild steppe grasses. It slowly becomes a mere quiet suggestion of a boundary, an incredibly soft, deeply weathered shadow in the earth that you could easily, thoughtlessly step right over without even once noticing its ancient, lingering presence. There is an unparalleled, deeply calming, profound beauty in this gentle, undeniable fading. It shows us softly that even the most monumental, incredibly heavy, seemingly permanent things in the world eventually learn the beautiful art of laying down their heavy armour, softening their rigid defensive posture, lowering their guard entirely and quietly, peacefully merging back into the gentle, sweeping, soft embrace of the earth from which they were originally born, quietly whispering to the wind that it is perfectly, absolutely safe to just let go. Let that image of the crumbling, deeply weathered earthen mound softly dissolve into a microscopic world of incredible unseen resilience. On those very same remote, golden, sun-baked earthen ridges that appear to the naked eye to be slowly, inevitably fading away into nothingness, modern scientists have recently discovered a delicate living armour. It is not made of heavy forged iron or precisely carved stone, but of a deeply complex, incredibly thin biological crust. A quiet, patient, microscopic community of resilient cyanobacteria, dark, spreading lichens and miniature velvety, deep jade mosses has seamlessly grown over the centuries, acting exactly like a protective living skin. This microscopic forest, barely a few millimeters high, naturally and stubbornly binds the ancient loose dust particles together, effectively holding the massive ancient history securely in place against the persistent, scouring, dry winds of the high steppe. It is a profound, beautifully quiet collaboration between ancient human history and the absolute smallest, most unassuming forms of life on the planet. The colossal, intimidating structures we built with exhausting effort to defend our empires are now being silently, gently, and effortlessly defended by the earth itself, wrapped warmly and securely in a fragile living green blanket that thrives quietly in the cool, dew-soaked, silent mornings of the desert. This gentle, unspoken harmony with the natural environment and the shifting seasons takes on a completely different, breathtakingly beautiful form when the deep, heavily frozen winter descends upon the sweeping northern plains. In the later, incredibly quiet centuries during the expansive reign of the Ming Dynasty, the sheer, bitter, deeply penetrating cold was not viewed as an enemy to be fought, but was ingeniously welcomed as a master architect. Instead of painstakingly digging clay and baking bricks in roaring hot kilns, local builders constructed temporary shimmering, impossibly beautiful barriers of pure frozen water. By taking massive bundles of freshly cut woven willow branches and repeatedly, patiently pouring buckets of freezing cold river water over them during the absolute darkest sub-zero nights, they built towering, glittering walls of solid, thick ice. These ethereal, translucent, crystalline fortifications would gleam beautifully and fiercely under the pale silver winter moon, resembling a temporary magical fairy tale palace of glass far more than a rigid military barricade. When the soft, warm, gentle breezes of the spring eventually returned, these mighty, glittering walls would simply, quietly, and completely melt away, returning seamlessly to the rushing rivers and the soft earth without leaving a single, lingering scar. It is a stunning, deeply calming reminder that sometimes the most profound, unyielding strength lies entirely in temporary graceful adaptation rather than rigid, permanent resistance. As your own breathing naturally mirrors that slow, rhythmic cycle of freezing and melting, of holding and releasing, let your mind drift smoothly back to the more familiar, heavy, deeply textured grey-blue bricks of the eastern mountain ranges. If you were to walk along the high parapets and trace your fingertips slowly and deliberately over the rough, heavily weathered surface of these heavy stones, you might feel the faint, raised, incredibly delicate outlines of ancient, beautifully drawn calligraphy. In the quiet, dusty, remote valleys below, hundreds upon hundreds of years ago, local artisans, village kilns, and solitary brickmakers stamped their individual names, their specific, quiet hometowns, and the precise historical dates into the wet, raw, heavy clay before it was ever fired in the heat. This was not merely a system of cold, calculated imperial quality control. It inadvertently and beautifully created a deeply moving, continent-sized, permanent registry of the everyday, humble, quiet hands that physically shape the mountain. Millions of ordinary, nameless people left their deeply personal, enduring, quiet signature in the vastness of the wild. To physically touch those faint, worn, beautifully carved characters today is to reach directly and intimately across the silent, echoing centuries and comfortably hold hands with an ancient, patient craftsman, feeling the warm, lingering, deeply human echo of their daily methodical labour securely and peacefully resting right beneath your palm. That deeply familiar, incredibly soothing, muted slate blue-grey colour of those signed, heavy bricks is, entirely in itself, the direct result of a gentle, beautiful elemental alchemy. We instinctively picture ancient, massive brick kilns as places of harsh, roaring, aggressive, red-hot fire, but the beautiful, cool, calming hue of the Ming Dynasty stones was actually born entirely from the soft, completely extinguishing embrace of water. After the massive, heavy clay blocks had baked continuously for many days in the intense, searing, blinding heat, the domed brick kilns were not simply allowed to cool slowly in the dry mountain air. Instead, the ancient, exhausted brickmakers would carefully carry large, heavy wooden buckets of freezing, clear, fresh mountain water and pour it slowly, deliberately over the incredibly hot, sealed roofs of the kilns. The water would instantly, violently vaporize, sending thick, billowing, completely suffocating clouds of pure white steam deep down into the firing chamber completely changing the chemical atmosphere within the dark space. This slow, deeply quiet, watery suffocation of the roaring flames caused the heavy iron compounds inside the clay to magically turn from a harsh, rusty, aggressive red into a soft, calming, incredibly peaceful slate blue-grey. The very colour of the wall, the specific, beautiful shade that blends so perfectly with the cloudy, high-altitude sky and the distant, misty green mountains, is a permanent, physical, frozen memory of cool water gently and completely extinguishing a roaring fire. Just as that beautifully cool, cascading water slowly and completely quieted the intense roaring heat of the deep kilns, allow the steady, predictable, rhythmic sound of these softly spoken words to gently cool and soothe the busy, active, flickering thoughts of your waking mind. You can actually feel the heavy, resting muscles of your face softening, completely releasing any lingering, stubborn tension around the corners of the eyes and the tight hinge of the jaw. The physical body simply grows heavier, sinking deeper, softer, and more completely into the comforting, profoundly supportive surface directly beneath you. From the deeply cooling memory of that vaporizing, hissing water, follow a winding, ancient, heavily shadowed stone path far down into a deeply green, quiet valley where a real, rushing, vibrant river cuts cleanly and sharply straight through the landscape. Usually the vast, continuous architecture avoids the deep, low, vulnerable valleys, preferring to ride high and arrogantly on the jagged, unapproachable crests, but at a uniquely beautiful, heavily forested place called Jumenku, the heavy architecture gracefully, beautifully surrenders completely to the flowing water. Here, the incredibly heavy, imposing stone structure actually strides directly and confidently across the rushing clear waters of the Jujiang River. The ancient, brilliant builders constructed a massive, incredibly elegant, deeply anchored stone bridge with 9 perfect, sweeping, symmetrical arches, allowing the clear, cool, rushing mountain water to flow continuously, happily and freely right beneath the heavy, imposing fortifications. Standing quietly on the worn, deeply wet, slippery stones of this river crossing, the surrounding air is constantly, beautifully filled with the deeply relaxing, continuous white noise of the rushing, tumbling current, a ceaseless liquid hush that naturally, effortlessly dampens all the sharp sounds of the surrounding wild forest. It perfectly and quietly demonstrates an ancient, profound, deeply calming philosophy of elemental balance. When faced with an unstoppable, eternal, natural force like a flowing mountain river, the wisest, most enduring, most beautiful choice is not to aggressively dam it or fight it, but to gracefully build a beautiful, respectful frame entirely around it, quietly allowing the wild water to simply follow its own eternal, peaceful path. Within the high, deeply shadowed, incredibly cool eaves of those 9 sweeping stone arches and tucked safely and snugly into the high, square, dark ceilings of the isolated, windswept watchtowers scattered across the endless ridges, lives a completely different, incredibly delicate kind of traveller. Every single warming spring for hundreds, perhaps many thousands of consecutive uninterrupted years, massive, sweeping, chattering flocks of deeply elegant, dark-winged, fork-tailed swallows return faithfully from their impossibly long, exhausting, continent-spanning migrations to nest directly and safely in the ancient, crumbling stonework. They gather soft, wet, brown mud from the river valleys and weave it patiently, delicately and meticulously with dry, golden mountain grasses, building their small, perfectly cup-shaped, fragile homes in the absolute highest, safest, most sheltered corners of the ancient heavy brick pavilions. To these tiny, incredibly swift, beautiful birds, this massive, imposing, deeply intimidating military structure is absolutely nothing more than a welcoming, deeply familiar, continent-spanning, sheltering cliff face, generously and permanently provided for their safe, annual return. As the warm, heavy golden sun sets, the deep resting violet sky fills entirely with the beautiful, swooping, fluid, effortless acrobatics of these tiny, chattering birds, weaving seamlessly and joyfully in and out of the heavy square stone windows. They bring a vibrant, fluttering, incredibly joyful pulse of pure, delicate life to the heavy, silent, resting antiquity, proving beautifully and profoundly that even the most austere, rigid human monuments eventually, inevitably become welcoming, quiet homes for the soft, breathing, innocent world. If you were to sit perfectly, wonderfully still in one of those high, swallow-filled, darkening towers in the incredibly steep, aggressively rugged, soaring section of Simmatai, you would notice something deeply extraordinary, almost magical about the way the cool mountain air itself behaves. Because of the sheer, dramatic, plunging, incredibly deep V-shape of the surrounding rocky shadowed valleys and the smooth, hard, reflective surfaces of the ancient winding masonry, this specific vast landscape acts precisely like an immense, natural, perfectly tuned acoustic bowl. The architecture here literally bends, shapes, and carries the sound in deeply mysterious, beautifully calming, entirely unexpected ways. A gentle, incredibly soft, barely noticeable breeze rustling quietly through the distant, dark, heavily scented pine forests. On the far opposite ridge is gently amplified and carried perfectly across the incredibly deep expanse, arriving softly at your ears exactly like the low, rhythmic, deeply comforting breathing of a sleeping ancient giant. The distant, solitary, echoing call of a circling mountain hawk bounces beautifully back and forth between the massive stone walls, slowly, gently fading into a beautifully layered, ghostly, dying reverberation. It is a place specifically designed for profound, deep, absolute listening. The silence here is not empty or hollow. It is a rich, heavily textured, incredibly deep, profound quiet that naturally invites the tired mind to expand entirely outward, filling the massive, empty, dark spaces of the deep valley, leaving absolutely no room whatsoever for the small, cramped, loud worries of the everyday waking world. Let your own quiet awareness gently, effortlessly expand entirely out into that beautiful, deeply echoing vast valley. Your breath naturally, beautifully settles into a slow, incredibly predictable, deeply reassuring rhythm. There is absolutely no need to actively listen, no need to process, to analyze, or to hold on to anything at all. The spoken words are just like that distant, incredibly soft mountain breeze, gently, seamlessly moving through the vast, quiet, profoundly resting spaces of your own settling mind. As the deep, heavy purple twilight in that echoing vast valley finally gives way to the absolute, incredibly crisp, ink-black, stunning canopy of the deep night, the true, deeply quiet, awe-inspiring purpose of some of the absolute highest, most isolated stone platforms is beautifully, silently revealed. Modern, dedicated archaeologists painstakingly mapping the endless crumbling ruins have recently discovered that certain, highly specific flat-topped watchtowers were not placed randomly on the ridges, but were intentionally, precisely, and flawlessly aligned with the magnificent, incredibly slow, eternal turning of the massive cosmos above. Long before the chaotic invention of complex, buzzing modern telescopes, ancient, deeply patient imperial astronomers used these impossibly high, perfectly level, isolated stone platforms as vast, incredibly accurate naked-eye observatories. By standing completely still on the flat roof of a specific high tower, an observer could perfectly track the exact specific point where the heavy, pale winter sun would rise directly behind a distant, jagged, snow-capped peak, flawlessly and beautifully marking the absolute shortest, darkest, most quiet day of the entire year. The entire, sweeping, immense mountain landscape, flawlessly combined with the carefully placed heavy stones, was utilised as an unimaginably vast, beautifully precise, deeply natural calendar. It is deeply, profoundly awe-inspiring and deeply settling to imagine an ancient, solitary, brilliant scholar wrapped tightly in heavy, warm silk, standing completely alone in the freezing, absolute, pristine dark, patiently and beautifully connecting the heavy, unmoving stones directly beneath his feet to the slow, eternal, majestic, entirely perfect clockwork of the glittering, beautifully spinning galaxy above. When that meticulously tracked pale winter sun finally does peek over the distant, jagged, freezing horizon, it interacts with the winding, endless stone in a way that feels almost entirely, perfectly intentional. Because the wall twists, turns, and undulates constantly, slavishly following the organic, deeply chaotic, rolling ridges of the ancient earth, it catches the very first, incredibly low-angled, softer light of the dawn with breathtaking, dramatic, almost theatrical grace. For a brief, incredibly quiet, beautifully still hour in the early morning, the pale, warming, golden sunlight gently and softly kisses the eastern-facing, rough-hewn grey parapets, while the deep western sides remain entirely plunged in deep, cool, restful, violet shadow. This beautiful phenomenon creates a mesmerizing, high-contrast, deeply visual rhythm, a beautifully slow, repeating pattern of bright, warm, waking gold and deep, restful, heavy dark that marches silently and majestically across the entire vast continent. The structure literally becomes a massive, three-dimensional, endless stone canvas that paints and quietly repaints itself entirely with the changing, sweeping, slow angle of the moving sun. This daily, perfectly silent, entirely reliable performance is a gentle, deeply comforting, profound reminder of the absolute, unshakable reliability of the morning light. No matter how deep, how bitterly cold, or how impossibly long the dark night has been, the golden, warming, beautiful light always, inevitably and softly returns to wash over the ancient, patient stones. As that warm, beautiful, sweeping light moves softly and steadily over the heavy ancient stonework, it occasionally catches a faint, completely unexpected, brilliant gleam hiding in the deepest, most protected crevices of the oldest, most untouched, silent sections. While we almost universally collectively picture the Great Wall as a massive structure of raw, exposed, rough, grey brick, many sprawling, incredibly prominent sections were actually originally covered entirely, from base to peak, in a thick, perfectly smooth layer of brilliant, blindingly bright white lime plaster. In the vibrant, bustling, wealthy height of the Ming Dynasty, the most heavily fortified, incredibly important mountain passes wouldn't have looked like weathered, blending grey stone at all, but would have gleamed with a blinding, pristine, brilliant whiteness, standing out sharply against the dark, deep green mountains, precisely like a crisp, winding, endless ribbon of pure, fresh snow that simply never, ever melted. Over the unimaginably long, incredibly slow, deeply patient passing of the centuries, the heavy, drumming rains, the biting, carrying winds, and the slow, grinding, gentle turn of time have gently, quietly washed this stark white coating completely away, softly revealing the raw, incredibly honest, beautifully weathered grey skeleton beneath. It is a stunning, deeply comforting, entirely peaceful metaphor for the slow, beautiful, necessary stripping away of outward rigid appearances, just as the wall has slowly, patiently shed its pristine, bright, gleaming, perfect armour to finally reveal its true, deeply weathered, enduring, honest core. The beautiful quiet of the deep night smoothly allows us to softly, willingly shed the bright, necessary, exhausting masks of our waking lives, gently resting peacefully, completely, and deeply in our own, true, quiet endurance as the deep, heavy night slowly continues to unfold. As that deep night slowly unfolds over the sweeping northern plains, the very ground beneath the ancient fortifications holds a quiet, hidden secret of absolute stillness. Imagine the heavy, dark iron of massive cauldrons suspended over deep, roaring fires. The ancient builders did not merely dig up the raw, fertile clay and hastily stack it to form their defences. Instead, they took the unimaginably patient time to painstakingly roast, boil, and essentially cook the loose earth. This slow, deliberate, incredibly intense application of heat served a profound, brilliant purpose. It completely purified the heavy soil, gently and permanently removing any hidden, resting seeds, dormant, tangled grass roots, or deeply burrowing insects. By physically cooking the very earth itself, they created a deeply sterile, incredibly pure, and structurally flawless foundation that would never, ever sprout disruptive weeds, nor be slowly, inevitably weakened from within by tunneling life or expanding roots. It is a stunning, deeply foundational act of architectural preservation, an almost alchemical process ensuring that the heavy, golden earthen mounds would remain perfectly, beautifully silent and undisturbed from the inside out for millennia. There is a profound, resting, deeply heavy peace in this ancient, meticulous process, the intentional, careful creation of a perfectly quiet, completely dormant space, entirely free from the chaotic, restless upward energy of unseen growth, allowing the massive structure to simply exist in absolute, undisturbed, timeless suspension. While the deep, roasted interior of that Western Earth remains perfectly, peacefully dormant, the massive, imposing physical presence of the winding wall has quietly, invisibly shaped the living, breathing world that naturally surrounds it on a grand, sweeping, evolutionary scale. Stretching continuously for thousands of unpredictable miles across rugged, mountainous terrain and plunging, misty valleys, the high stone barrier has stood for so impossibly long that it has actually become an incredibly effective, entirely invisible line drawn directly through nature itself. Botanists and biologists studying the wild, high-altitude flora have recently beautifully discovered that the wall literally acts as a massive, gentle, quiet filter for the sweeping mountain wind and the tiny drifting seeds it carries. On the northern, fiercely windswept, colder slopes, entirely different subspecies of resilient silver-leafed mountain shrubs and hardy, low-lying pale wildflowers have slowly, patiently evolved. They are now separated completely, on a genetic level, from their lush, vibrant green, broad-leafed cousins resting comfortably on the sheltered, warmer southern side of the ancient brickwork. The massive human-made structure inadvertently became a slow, quiet, monumental conductor of natural evolution, subtly, constantly dictating exactly where a delicate, pale seed might softly fall, take root, and eventually thrive. It is a beautiful, deeply humbling, profoundly calming thought that a heavy barrier designed exclusively to separate aggressive human empires instead became a quiet, enduring participant in the slow, graceful, incredibly patient dance of the natural world, gently shaping the very leaves, soft petals, and deep roots of the ancient forest over the span of countless, completely silent centuries. Let your tired mind drift gently down from that vast, overarching evolutionary scale to something incredibly intimate, something small and familiar enough to trace gently with a single resting fingertip. On the colossal, heavy granite foundation blocks that base the absolute steepest, most terrifyingly unapproachable mountain passes, the smooth, rain-weathered surface is sometimes beautifully, softly interrupted by shallow, rhythmic, parallel grooves. These are not the random, chaotic, jagged scratches of shifting tectonic ice or tumbling natural rockfall, but the deliberate, perfectly spaced, incredibly ancient chisel marks left behind by individual master stonemasons. If you look closely at the way the cool, low light catches these delicate, shallow impressions in the early, soft, misty hours of the morning, you can actually see the precise, undeniable rhythm of a human arm rising and falling heavily in the crisp mountain air. The exact repeated angle of the shallow cut permanently preserves the quiet, methodical, heavy heartbeat of an ancient worker patiently, repeatedly striking forged iron against unyielding stone. It is a profoundly calming, incredibly grounding, beautifully human texture, a frozen, physical recording of steady, focused, unhurried, and completely dedicated human effort. There is absolutely no frantic rush in these ancient marks, only the beautiful, deeply reassuring, hypnotic cadence of a deeply physical task being performed with quiet, absolute dedication, one steady, echoing, ringing strike at a time, until the massive, unyielding mountain slowly, inevitably yielded to a beautifully cut, perfectly square, eternally resting edge. As you imagine that slow, steady, rhythmic rising and falling of the ancient stonemason's arm, simply allow your own chest to gently rise and fall with the exact same unhurried, perfectly natural ease. The physical body deeply recognizes this ancient, steady, predictable tempo, completely releasing the heavy, tired muscles of the shoulders and the back, and softly letting the busy, wandering mind simply drift on the comforting, incredibly reliable current of the breath. Absolutely nothing needs to be rushed right now, nothing needs to be figured out, and absolutely nothing needs to be held too tightly. You're completely safe to just sink deeper into the quiet rhythm. That quiet, steady, reassuring breath carries us softly and seamlessly toward a remote, deeply hidden, heavily forested valley in the Yan Mountains, where the ancient, exhausted builders discovered a natural seam of stone so unexpectedly beautiful that it instantly transformed utilitarian military architecture into a sprawling, breathtaking natural mosaic. In the secluded, gracefully winding section beautifully known as the Bayangyu Wall, the standard, heavy, utilitarian grey bricks are suddenly and breathtakingly replaced by massive, naturally occurring, roughly hewn blocks of solid, deeply veined mountain marble. But this is absolutely not the stark, blindingly bright, polished white marble of formal, rigid imperial palaces. Rather, it is a rich, warm, deeply soothing, entirely natural shade of soft, dusky lavender and bruised, resting violet purple. When the low, thick golden light of the late-setting sun softly strikes this specific, winding stretch of the ancient fortifications, the entire rugged mountainside seems to softly, beautifully glow from within, radiating a warm, plum-coloured ambient light that perfectly, seamlessly matches the deepening, sleepy twilight sky. The ancient masons simply, practically used the raw stone the generous mountain provided, entirely unintentionally creating a sweeping, miles-long ribbon of vibrant, calming, natural art. It is a stunning, gentle, deeply moving surprise hidden deep in the rugged wilderness, proving beautifully that even in the strict pursuit of absolute, unyielding defense, the earth still generously offers up hidden veins of pure, breathtaking, calming beauty, quietly painting the heavy, serious history with soft, watercolour strokes of unexpected, resting purple and faded rose. As that soft violet marble-reflected light slowly, gently fades into the cool dusk, the deep, rushing mountain wind begins its nightly sweeping descent through the craggy, impossibly narrow, jagged passes. In specific, highly elevated, dramatically jagged sections of the wall like Jiangku, the fierce, howling, invisible gusts do not merely batter pointlessly against the silent, heavy stones, they actively, musically, and beautifully play them. The ancient architects meticulously, carefully designed the thousands of narrow, deeply recessed arrow slits and observation windows with specific, perfectly angled, inward-sloping, heavy stone geometric frames, originally intended to perfectly protect the quiet guards from incoming whistling projectiles. Inadvertently, these deep, hollow, perfectly angled stone cavities function exactly like the carved, carefully shaped wooden mouthpiece of a massive, impossibly huge, mountain-sized flute. When the swift, cool, high-altitude wind perfectly hits these heavy stone apertures at just the right, precise, sweeping angle, the entire vast, winding structure magically produces a low, mournful, incredibly beautiful, deeply resonating whistling sound. It is a continuous, harmonic, deeply settling, vast chord that rises and falls smoothly and perfectly with the unpredictable, heavy breathing of the weather. Sitting quietly within the heavy, safe, protected walls and listening to this vast, sweeping, wind-blown, invisible instrument is profoundly, beautifully hypnotic, a natural, endless, sighing lullaby generated completely by the invisible, rushing air moving gently and perfectly over the patient, eternally unmoving stone. Let the haunting, resonant, deeply calming melody of that wind-blown mountain flute carry you smoothly and effortlessly far away to the absolute eastern edge of the known ancient world, where the wall fundamentally and beautifully changes its entire relationship with the surrounding landscape. While we almost exclusively picture the heavy grey stone climbing stubbornly and arrogantly over high, dry peaks at the beautifully unique Hushan section, the ancient designers encountered the massive, deeply flowing, utterly uncrossable dark expanse of the mighty Yalu River. Instead of vainly, stubbornly attempting to bridge the impossible, rushing, chaotic gap with heavy stone and sinking foundations, they brilliantly, humbly utilize the deep, dark water itself as the ultimate, impenetrable natural barrier. The heavy grey stone fortifications gracefully, slowly slope downwards from the mountain peak and simply, quietly plunge straight into the deep, cold, heavily shadowed riverbank, essentially handing the heavy, exhausting duty of defence completely over to the silent, immense, fluid power of the water. For miles along this border, there is absolutely no built stone wall at all. Only the steep, natural, heavily forested, rocky cliffs and the deep, sweeping, silent, incredibly powerful current of the river acting as a liquid, constantly moving frontier. It is a deeply restful, profoundly wise, completely humbling architectural choice, beautifully demonstrating that true mastery of a wild landscape comes from knowing exactly when to stop building, when to step back quietly, and when to respectfully, peacefully allow the immense, unstoppable, ancient forces of nature to seamlessly take over the heavy, exhausting work. If you were to gently, quietly, turn away from the edge of that deep, dark, rushing river and step softly inside the closest heavy stone watchtower, pausing for a moment to allow your eyes to fully adjust to the cool, quiet, heavily resting shadows, you might softly notice a faint, ghostly whisper of ancient, unexpected colour. We collectively perceive these heavy military structures today as uniformly grey, utterly barren, and deeply, functionally austere. But many centuries ago, the interior, smoothly plastered walls of certain highly important command towers were brightly and vibrantly alive with rich, sweeping, detailed murals. In the dim, perfectly filtered soft light, dedicated archaeologists have discovered the incredibly faint, softly flaking, delicate remnants of deep, crushed lapis lazuli blue, vibrant, brilliant cinnabar red, and rich, earthy malachite green pigments. These were absolutely not rigid military maps or harsh warnings, but beautiful, sprawling, incredibly detailed paintings of peaceful, floating, swirling clouds, gentle, blooming, delicate pink lotus flowers, and fiercely protective, beautifully adorned mythological guardian spirits. The quiet men who lived their entire isolated lives in these lonely, sky-high, wind-battered boxes desperately, deeply craved the soft, comforting, humanizing beauty of art and colour. Though almost completely, beautifully faded away by the slow, gentle, sweeping, inevitable breath of time, these pale, lingering, fragile smudges of colour remain as a deeply touching, incredibly quiet testament to the enduring human need to create a small, warm, heavily painted sanctuary of peace and beauty, even while stationed at the absolute terrifying edge of the cold, untamed wilderness. As we slowly, gently imagine those vibrant, beautiful ancient colours slowly fading completely into the soft, resting grey shadows of history, consider the truly unimaginable, mind-bending physical scale of the entire sweeping structure in relation to the moving golden sun. The ancient winding wall stretches so incredibly, impossibly far across the massive, sweeping, gentle curvature of the globe that it completely, entirely spans multiple geographical time zones. When the heavy, warm, golden sun finally peacefully dips completely below the rugged, watery horizon at the old Dragon's Head in the far east, gently wrapping the ocean-facing smooth stones in the deep, velvet, cooling absolute dark of the night, the distant golden rammed earthen mounds of the far western deserts are still brilliantly, blindingly illuminated by the bright, warm, late afternoon sun. The wall physically actually experiences the beautiful, gentle, easing transition of twilight not as a single fleeting momentary event, but as an incredibly slow, sweeping, hours-long gentle wave of deep shadow that travels methodically, softly, and continuously down its heavy twisting spine. It is a structure so vast, so deeply, permanently woven into the very fabric of the massive Earth that it actually, impossibly holds the bright waking afternoon and the deep, resting, profoundly starry night at the exact same beautiful, suspended moment in time. This incredible, sweeping, continental shadow slowly, gently, and beautifully reminds us that time is never truly rigid or uniform, and deep restorative rest always arrives exactly when it is naturally meant to, sweeping softly across the landscape like a cool, impossibly heavy, comforting blanket. As the distant golden western edges finally, deeply and willingly surrender to the cooling, deep blue, peaceful twilight, the entire massive, thousands of miles long sleeping dragon of stone finally, completely rests under a single, unified, breathtaking canopy of brilliant, shimmering silver stars. The heavy baked stones gently hold the day's accumulated warmth, slowly, imperceptibly releasing it into the cool night air, settling even more deeply into their ancient unmoving foundations. And in that vast, continent-spanning, absolute ringing stillness, there are even more quiet, deeply hidden, beautiful secrets resting just beneath the dark surface, waiting patiently and peacefully for the softest, most gentle, silver light of the rising moon to slowly, gracefully reveal them to the quiet night. When that soft, searching silver light of the rising moon finally spills over the jagged eastern mountain ridges, it occasionally finds its perfect, uninterrupted reflection not on hard, dusty stone, but on the completely still, beautifully glass-like surface of deep, silent water. In a profoundly serene, deeply hidden valley in a bay province, at a place quietly known as Panjiaku, the ancient heavy architecture performs a breathtaking, completely unexpected act of graceful physical surrender. Here, a massive modern reservoir has quietly and slowly flooded the deep plunging gorge, and instead of being destroyed or washed away, the Great Wall simply, peacefully continues its long winding journey directly beneath the cool, dark, mirroring surface of the lake. The heavy grey watchtowers and the winding crenellated parapets descend seamlessly and beautifully into the emerald water, structurally perfect and entirely preserved in a silent, weightless aquatic world, Schools of silver-scaled, darting fish now swim effortlessly and quietly through the ancient submerged archways where heavily armoured guards once stood their ground. The deep water acts as a magnificent buoyant cushion, holding the massive heavy stones in a state of absolute suspended gravity and profound peace. Looking gently down through the crystal-clear moonlit depths at the ghostly submerged architecture provides a beautiful, floating sense of reassurance, a profound realization that even when the surrounding landscape fundamentally, drastically shifts, the ancient foundations can gracefully adapt, finding a completely new, silent, beautifully weightless existence in the quiet, supportive dark. If you were to gently trace your hand along the cool waterline of those partially submerged ancient stones, feeling the soft, slick algae that now clings beautifully to the masonry, you might uncover a staggering, deeply hidden secret of profound geological time locked completely within the rock itself. Many of the massive, rough-hewn limestone blocks used to construct these high, sweeping mountain passes were quarried directly from the surrounding jagged peaks. But millions upon millions of years before human hands ever touched them or shaped them, these soaring, cloud-scraping mountains were actually the soft, silty, deeply submerged floor of a vast, ancient, prehistoric ocean. Locked permanently and beautifully within the heavy grey blocks are the delicate, perfectly preserved, spiralling fossils of ancient marine life. Tiny, perfectly coiled ammonites, the fragile ribbed impressions of ancient seashells, and the fossilised remnants of microscopic ancient reefs. The ancient builders unknowingly took the compressed, silent floor of a vanished sea and lifted it straight up into the thin, cold mountain air to touch the sky. It is a stunning, mind-expanding shift in perspective. The heavy, imposing wall is not just a monument of human history. It is a sprawling, continent-sized museum of ancient aquatic life, silently and beautifully reminding us that the earth beneath our feet is constantly, gracefully shifting, turning resting ocean depths into soaring mountain peaks over the unimaginably patient, slow march of geological time. From that staggering, dizzying expanse of deep, ancient ocean time, the wall also graciously, beautifully preserves the most fleeting, incredibly intimate and impossibly small moments of the past. When the millions of heavy clay bricks were being meticulously shaped and laid out in endless rows to dry in the warm, baking sun centuries ago, they were entirely soft, yielding, and completely vulnerable to the bustling world around them. In various quiet sections across the vast network, modern hikers and careful observers often stumble upon a deeply touching, completely accidental, beautiful decoration permanently baked into the hardened clay. Pressed clearly, gently, and perfectly into the surface of the stones are the tiny, distinct paw prints of a wandering village dog, the delicate, soft track of a domestic cat, or the small, branching, perfectly preserved footprints of a passing mountain bird that lightly hopped across the drying bricks. These tiny, innocent, completely natural interruptions were never smoothed over, corrected, or thrown away by the ancient workers. They were simply, practically fired in the hot kilns and built directly into the massive defences. It is a wonderfully grounding, deeply endearing detail. Amidst the grandiose, serious, heavy machinery of imperial defence, the playful, completely unbothered, wandering life of a stray animal is permanently immortalised, bringing a warm, gentle, beautifully ordinary smile to a massive structure built for entirely extraordinary, serious times. Just as those soft, unbothered paw prints were gently and permanently accepted into the yielding clay without any resistance, simply allow your own resting body to sink just a little bit deeper into the soft, comforting surface directly beneath you. There is absolutely no need to smooth out your wandering thoughts or correct the natural, quiet drifts of your resting mind. Let them come and go exactly as they please, leaving only a faint, comfortable, harmless impression as the heavy muscles of your legs and arms surrender completely to the warm, anchoring, deeply reliable pull of gravity. As you feel that deeply reassuring, widening sense of physical space and release, imagine the actual physical experience of walking along the very top of this monumental structure. We often nervously picture a narrow, terrifying, precarious ledge balancing anxiously on the absolute brink of a sheer, plunging drop. But in the most heavily fortified, grandly designed sections near the ancient capital, the top of the wall completely transforms into a magnificent, incredibly broad, beautifully paved, elevated avenue in the sky. It was meticulously designed to be astonishingly wide enough for 5 fully grown, heavily armoured horses to gallop comfortably, quietly side by side, or for 10 marching soldiers to walk perfectly easily abreast. The surface is paved with massive, perfectly flat, smoothly fitted granite slabs that provide an incredibly stable, generous, absolutely unyielding foundation. Walking along this vast, elevated highway feels entirely expansive, deeply open, and profoundly secure. It is a soaring, protective, beautifully flat balcony that stretches endlessly for miles, offering a profound sense of absolute stability and safe, comfortable passage high above the tangled, chaotic, unpredictable wilderness below. It represents a beautiful, calming paradox, a heavy structure built entirely for defense that actually feels like a welcoming, grand, endlessly unfolding, peaceful promenade gently inviting you to stroll endlessly and safely through the passing clouds. Along the inner, sheltered, deeply protected edges of that grand, sweeping promenade, the ancient, isolated guards cultivated a quiet, deeply sustaining, and beautiful relationship with the harsh, unforgiving earth. Stationed for years at a time in impossibly remote, fiercely wind-battered outposts, the soldiers brought with them the hardy, resilient, hopeful seeds of the Ziziphus jujuba, the Chinese date tree. They carefully, patiently and lovingly planted these small, unassuming saplings in the sheltered, sun-warmed nooks of the lower earthen foundations. Today, long centuries after the last lonely guards abandoned their silent, crumbling posts, these resilient, twisted, incredibly tough trees have beautifully, completely naturalized, forming lush, wild, deeply rooted groves that happily hug the ancient stonework. In the late golden cooling autumn, these sprawling thorny bushes erupt in a vibrant, heavy bounty of small, deep red, incredibly sweet, nourishing fruits. The wall, originally designed to strictly and aggressively deny passage, has organically blossomed into a generous, miles-long, winding, natural orchard. It now freely and abundantly feeds the wandering high-altitude birds, the shy mountain mammals, and the occasional weary traveller, beautifully demonstrating how tiny seeds planted in extreme hardship can quietly, eventually grow into an unexpected, enduring, sweet harvest that beautifully outlasts the very empires that planted them. As the landscape shifts and winds ever further toward the rugged interior, the physical, tactile texture and colour of the stones themselves undergoes a dramatic, stunning, and deeply beautiful transformation. Near the fiercely beautiful, rugged landscapes of the Yanmen Pass, the familiar, comforting slate-grey bricks completely disappear, seamlessly replaced by the raw, unyielding, heavy geology of the local terrain. Here, the wall is constructed entirely from massive, heavy blocks of deeply metamorphic, heavily compressed, iron-rich rock. These dense, unyielding stones are a striking, dark, almost metallic purplish black, gleaming fiercely and beautifully in the crisp, high-altitude sunlight. Because of their incredible density and uniquely high iron content, these dark walls actively, greedily absorb the bright, warming, golden rays of the long afternoon sun. When the sudden, biting, bitterly cold mountain twilight inevitably descends, these heavy, dark stones slowly, generously, and evenly radiate that captured, deeply stored thermal heat back out into the cool, rushing night air. Leaning gently against this specific, dark, heavy section of the wall in the cooling evening, feels exactly like resting your back against a massive, deeply comforting, perfectly warmed ancient stone hearth. It is a deeply soothing, heavily grounding, profoundly physical sensation, a massive geological blanket of captured sunshine that quietly, gently, wards off the sharp, biting edge of the coming starry night. Feel that imagined, radiating, heavy warmth seeping slowly and beautifully down into the tight resting muscles of your shoulders, melting away the sharp, lingering, exhausting edges of the waking day. The breath becomes even softer, quieter, and more deeply, peacefully settled. The tired mind does not need to build or defend any walls tonight. It can simply rest, completely open and entirely safe, bathed in the slow, lingering, heavy warmth of a profoundly peaceful, undisturbed evening. In the sheltered, perfectly preserved, warm shadows of those deep radiating stones, another incredibly human, beautifully touching layer of history is quietly etched directly into the rock. Throughout the long, sweeping, incredibly quiet centuries, the wall was not merely a strict military posting. It was a lonely, sweeping, inevitable journey for exiled scholars, travelling, observant poets, and quiet, wandering, peaceful monks. In secluded, highly protected corners, completely safe from the harsh, scouring mountain winds, these ancient, sensitive travellers painstakingly, beautifully carved, elegant lines of classical poetry and sweeping, fluid calligraphy directly into the heavy granite blocks. They left behind deeply moving, beautifully carved verses about the vast, haunting beauty of the full moon rising over the empty desert, the deep, aching, quiet longing for a distant, warm home, and the profound, humbling, vast scale of the spinning universe. Over the unimaginably long, quiet, patient centuries, these sharp, deeply carved characters have been beautifully, gently softened by the persistent sweeping rain, and many are now delicately, lovingly traced with bright, soft emerald green moss. The imposing, serious military barrier inadvertently became a sprawling, continent-sized, open-air library of quiet human emotion and deep, reflective vulnerability. It is deeply, profoundly comforting to trace these soft, moss-filled words with your eyes, quietly sharing a single, beautiful, resting moment of awe and gentle melancholy with a brilliant, lonely poet who stood in that exact same silent spot nearly 1,000 years ago. As the lingering, soft poetry slowly fades into the weathered ancient stone, let us drift smoothly and gently back toward the vast, silent, deeply arid expanses of the far northwest, where the wall performs its most breathtaking, deeply invisible and masterful vanishing act. In the sweeping, heavily wind-sculpted deserts of Xinjiang and Gansu, the ancient earthen mounds encounter a vast landscape already violently, beautifully carved by nature herself. The relentless, carrying, patient desert winds have spent millions of years carving the soft sandstone earth into massive, towering aerodynamic ridges and sweeping, hollowed-out, deeply shadowed valleys known beautifully as yardangs. When the ancient, brilliant builders extended the wall through this alien, sweeping, silent terrain, they completely and wisely abandoned any attempt at straight, rigid lines. Instead, they seamlessly, masterfully wove their rammed earth barriers directly into and gracefully between these massive, natural wind-carved structures. The human-made wall perfectly mimics the exact sweeping aerodynamic shape, the pale, resting golden colour, and the deep, silent texture of the natural surrounding ancient geology. From even a slight distance, it is absolutely beautifully impossible to tell where the patient, exhausting work of human hands gracefully ends, and where the ancient, masterful, eternal carving of the sweeping desert wind naturally begins. It is the absolute perfect pinnacle of architectural harmony, a quiet, deeply respectful, beautifully silent surrender to the massive, sweeping, ancient shapes of the resting earth. Yet, even in the most rugged, severe, and wildly untamed mountain landscapes, the ancient stonework is capable of hosting a sudden, breathtaking, overwhelmingly soft explosion of pure, delicate beauty. In the incredibly steep, aggressively winding, towering sections near Yinshanling, the arrival of early warming spring brings a complete transformation that feels entirely, wonderfully like a lucid, waking dream. The surrounding harsh, jagged, unyielding mountainsides are deeply, heavily forested, with thousands upon thousands of wild apricot and mountain almond trees. For a few brief, incredibly precious, fleeting weeks each year, long before the heavy green leaves even begin to softly bud, these ancient trees erupt into a massive, sweeping, fragrant, incredibly soft ocean of pale pink, soft white, and deep magenta blossoms. The heavy, serious, dark grey line of the Great Wall appears to physically beautifully float directly on top of a vast, fragrant, sweeping sea of delicate, soft, blowing petals. The absolute stark visual contrast between the heavy, permanent, unyielding, solemn stone and the impossibly fragile, violently colourful, incredibly temporary bloom of the soft flowers is profoundly, deeply moving. It is a stunning, deeply reassuring, beautiful reminder that no matter how harsh, how deeply frozen, or how impossibly long the cold winter has been, the soft, fragrant, gentle, undeniable, returning energy of life always, inevitably and beautifully returns to softly blanket the heavy world in quiet, blooming, effortless grace. That beautiful, cyclical, effortlessly returning grace is not just found in the softly blooming trees, but within the very quiet, ongoing life of the ancient wall itself. We often, mistakenly, view this sprawling, colossal monument as a single, static, completely finished event, a frozen, dead, unmoving relic of a long-gone ancient empire. But the true, deeply beautiful, incredibly comforting reality is that the wall is a constant, ongoing, beautiful living act of incredibly patient, communal, dedicated care. Today, in the quiet, remote, peaceful farming villages that gently dot the deep, plunging, fertile valleys directly below the crumbling ruins, the local people still view the massive structure as a deeply familiar, quiet, sleeping neighbour. Without any grand, loud imperial decree or massive disruptive industrial machinery, small groups of dedicated, quiet, local preservationists and humble farmers routinely, patiently hike up the incredibly steep, winding, deeply forested trails. With their own calloused, careful, gentle hands, they quietly clear away the damaging, invasive, heavy vines, lovingly and carefully replace a single, heavy grey brick that has tumbled softly into the winter snow, and gently pack fresh, clean, rich earth around the exposed ancient roots of the crumbling watchtowers. The wall is not merely enduring because it was built incredibly strong, it is beautifully enduring because it is continually, quietly and lovingly held together by the gentle, patient, repeated touch of thousands of caring human hands across time. It is a profoundly, deeply resting thought, the beautiful, settling knowledge that we are never truly finished, that preservation is simply an act of continuous, gentle love, and that there will always be quiet, patient hands ready to carefully, softly rebuild what the heavy passage of time has gently worn away, allowing the ancient stones and our own deeply tired minds to peacefully, completely and safely find our rest. In the profound, velvet stillness of that continental rest, the wall reveals a hidden, almost celestial geometry that can only be appreciated from the quiet perspective of the high, circling birds. Far from being a random, chaotic scramble across the peaks, the most vital and grand sections of the Ming Dynasty walls were meticulously, almost rhythmically planned with an incredible mathematical precision. Imagine a single, enormous golden master tape being pulled taut across the rugged earth. For thousands of miles, the massive watchtowers were placed at almost perfectly equal intervals, precisely 2 arrow shots apart. This ensures that no single inch of the stone pathway is ever truly isolated or out of sight of its neighbouring towers. This intentional rhythmic repetition creates a deep, structural heartbeat within the landscape, a steady, pulsing meter of stone and shadow that marches with absolute, unshakable confidence over the deepest valleys and highest peaks. It is a stunning, deeply settling realization that even in the most wild, jagged and unpredictable mountain terrain, there exists a hidden, perfect and entirely human order. This rhythmic spacing acts like a steady, low-frequency hum of safety, a silent architectural reassurance that every part of this vast journey is connected, every lonely sentinel is supported, and the entire massive structure is held together by a single, unified, and beautifully consistent vision of absolute balance and enduring harmony. The deep structural harmony of those perfectly spaced towers is mirrored by the quiet, heavy chemistry of the very bricks that comprise them. A chemistry that has effectively turned the mountain wall into a massive, thousands of miles long time capsule. Deep within the molecular structure of the Ming Dynasty blue-grey bricks, the specific high-temperature firing process caused a rare, beautiful phenomenon known as vitrification. The clay was heated so intensely that it didn't just harden, it partially transformed into a dense, non-porous, almost glass-like ceramic substance. This unique obsidian-like density makes the bricks incredibly resistant to the deep, penetrating expansion cracks of freezing winter water and the slow, grinding erosion of the mountain wind. Because these bricks effectively repel moisture, they do not merely crumble into red dust like common clay, but remain sharp-edged and heavy for over 600 years. It is a profound, deeply comforting testament to the power of transformation. Just as raw, soft earth can be forged through intense heat into something nearly as permanent and unyielding as a diamond, our own deep, resting minds can take the heat and pressure of the waking day and, through the quiet process of deep restorative sleep, transform them into something clear, resilient, and beautifully strong. As you let that image of clear, glass-like resilience settle into your thoughts, notice how your own breath has become a quiet, glass-like surface, smooth, effortless, and entirely undisturbed. The body grows heavier, becoming a part of the deep, non-porous quiet of the landscape. There is nothing you need to absorb or repel. You're simply existing in the same vitrified state of absolute enduring peace. From those sharp-edged, glass-like bricks of the eastern peaks, follow the winding stone ribbon into a deeply forested, misty valley, where the architecture undergoes a sudden, beautiful and highly localized transformation. In the unique, rarely visited section of the Huanghuacheng Wall, the heavy masonry does not just sit upon the earth. It is literally and beautifully overgrown by the ancient, twisted and deeply fragrant vines of wild mountain jasmine. For reasons lost to time, the local soil at the base of these specifically chosen fortifications is incredibly rich and alkaline, providing a perfect, secluded sanctuary for these delicate, white-flowered vines to thrive for centuries. In the late, humid evenings of early summer, the dark, heavy stone ramparts are almost completely obscured by a thick, heavy, shimmering blanket of tiny, star-shaped blossoms. The scent up here at the edge of the clouds is overwhelming, a thick, sweet, incredibly heady perfume that drifts for miles on the cool valley air. The wall has fundamentally shifted its identity from a cold, grey, defensive structure into a massive, soaring, vertical garden of intoxicating scent and soft white petals. This beautiful, fragrant takeover is a gentle reminder that the world's most formidable boundaries are, given enough time, often softened and reclaimed by the most delicate and beautiful things. The heavy, serious history is eventually, inevitably, and lovingly wrapped in a sweet floral embrace, turning an instrument of division into a place of profound, natural sensory wonder. This soft floral reclamation is not just an accidental byproduct of time, but a quiet, ongoing characteristic of the wall's entire existence as a massive cross-continental bridge for the secret, unseen world of insects. Entomologists have recently discovered that the Great Wall serves as a primary, high-altitude highway for the incredible multi-generational migrations of various butterfly species, including the magnificent orange and black swallowtails. As these delicate creatures navigate the massive, rugged mountain ranges, they use the long, continuous sun-warmed surface of the stone wall as a thermal guide. The dark bricks absorb the morning sun, creating a steady, upward-rising current of warm air that these tiny travellers use to glide effortlessly and quietly across vast distances with minimal effort. To these butterflies, the Great Wall is not a barrier at all, but a massive thermal engine that helps them on their impossible journey toward the distant southern forests. The heavy, immovable stone provides the light-winged, fragile insects with the exact invisible lift they need to survive. It is a breathtaking, deeply moving shift in scale, the heaviest, most permanent structure on Earth, acting as a gentle, supportive assistant to the lightest, most ephemeral of creatures, proving that even a monument built for strength can find its most beautiful purpose in providing a quiet, hidden lift to the most delicate and vulnerable. If you were to sit perfectly still in one of those high, sun-warmed watchtowers and watch the silent, flickering passage of a single butterfly, you would be sharing a moment of quiet observation with a legendary, historical figure who once walked these very same stones with a deeply different intent. In the early 20th century, the celebrated traveller and geographer William Edgar Gile became the first person in modern history to walk the entire, staggering length of the Great Wall from the sea to the desert. As he paced these thousands of miles, he didn't just document the stone and mortar, he recorded the deep, heavy and profound silence of the structure. He described the wall not as a ruin, but as a sleeping dragon, a creature that was not dead, but merely resting, waiting for the slow, inevitable return of its original quiet dignity. His journey serves as a beautiful, meditative bridge between the frantic modern world and the ancient resting past. He proved that to truly understand the wall, one must not look at it as a military obstacle, but must experience it as a long, continuous, slow-motion journey, a way of being in the world that prioritizes the steady, methodical step over the quick, frantic destination. His legacy invites us to stop trying to see the wall and instead learn to be with it, allowing its massive, slow and unhurried pace to dictate the quiet, steady rhythm of our own resting hearts. As you allow the steady, unhurried rhythm of that ancient journey to settle your own pace, notice how the very air around you seems to have grown thicker, cooler, and more profoundly still. The breath settles into a deep, low, and entirely natural cadence. You're not rushing towards sleep. Sleep is a vast, quiet landscape that is slowly, methodically, and beautifully unfolding all around you, just as the wall unfolds across the hidden peaks. This unfolding landscape occasionally reveals a detail so surprisingly modern and advanced that it feels almost like a beautiful glitch in time. In the strategically vital pass of the mountain and sea, the ancient architects incorporated a system of subterranean acoustic chambers built directly into the foundations of the largest watchtowers. These weren't dungeons or storage rooms, but precisely tuned, hollow cavities designed to act as massive earthbound resonators. If an intruder were to attempt to tunnel beneath the wall from miles away, the vibration would be caught by these hollow chambers and amplified into a low, ghostly, rumbling sound that the guards could feel through the very soles of their feet while they slept. The wall was quite literally designed to have ears that never closed, a structural nervous system that felt the very pulse of the earth. Today, these chambers remain silent, but they represent a profound, deeply settled state of awareness, a structure that is so deeply integrated with the ground beneath it that it can feel the slightest whisper of a movement. It is a beautiful metaphor for the state of deep restorative sleep, a state where we are profoundly resting and quiet, yet perfectly and safely attuned to the gentle, steady and reliable heartbeat of the world around us. The reliability of that heartbeat is physically manifested in the most remote western sections of the wall, where the architecture is forced to rely on a material even more ancient and enduring than kiln-fired brick. In the arid reaches of the Hexi corridor, the wall is constructed using a technique called rammed earth, where layers of local, mineral-rich soil were mixed with a tiny amount of moisture and packed down with such immense rhythmic force that the soil underwent a physical change, becoming as hard and resonant as solid granite. These walls have a unique, beautiful, layered appearance, resembling the deep sedimentary lines of a canyon wall or the rings of an ancient petrified tree. Because they are made entirely of the local compressed desert, they possess a unique thermal inertia. They stay incredibly cool during the scorching white-hot heat of the day and remain surprisingly deeply warm during the freezing star-shattered nights of the high desert. To lean against these rammed earth sections is to feel the literal weight and compression of the Earth's own history pressing back against you. It is a heavy, solid, and entirely unmoving presence that has stood for over 2,000 years, not by being harder than the desert, but by being the desert itself, compressed into a state of absolute, unshakable, and eternal rest. That state of eternal earthen rest occasionally plays host to a quiet, natural phenomenon that feels like a shared secret conversation between the sky and the stone. Because the Great Wall runs along such high, isolated and magnetically active mountain ridges, it frequently experiences a rare weather event known as mountain mist crowning. On particularly humid, still mornings, the high-altitude clouds don't just pass over the wall, they become physically caught and entangled in the crenellated parapets. A thick, white, silent ribbon of cloud will often sit perfectly still, draped over the stone like a heavy cotton wool blanket, following every twist and turn of the architecture for miles. For an observer standing within this mist, the rest of the world completely, beautifully disappears. There is no ground, no sky, and no distance, only the immediate cool, damp texture of the ancient grey bricks and the absolute muffled silence of the clouds. This crowning creates a temporary sky-high sanctuary of absolute whiteout peace. It is a place where the heavy visual noise of the world is completely, mercifully erased, leaving only the slow, steady rhythm of the breath and the solid, reassuring presence of the ancient hidden stone. This erasure of the world's noise is most profound at the absolute westernmost gate of the Great Wall, the lonely towering fortress of the Jade Gate Pass. For over 2 millennia, this gate was the final, official boundary of the known civilization. Once a traveller passed through its heavy shadowed arch, they were stepping into the vast, unknown and silent infinity of the Taklamakan Desert. Because of its extreme isolation, the Jade Gate has become a place of profound, almost religious silence. The only sound here is the low, steady, rhythmic shh of the fine, golden sand brushing against the weathered ancient walls, a sound that has been described as the desert slowly, patiently whispering to the stones. This gate represents the beautiful, necessary concept of a threshold. It is a place where we are invited to leave behind our heavy, accumulated stories, our titles and our worries, and step forward into a vast, open, and entirely quiet space. Entering sleep is exactly like passing through the Jade Gate. It is a graceful, silent crossing into a vast internal landscape where the only thing that matters is the steady, peaceful, and entirely safe rhythm of the journey itself. As you imagine yourself standing beneath the massive, cool, and deeply shadowed arch of the Jade Gate, let the low, whispering sound of the desert sand act as a final, beautiful lullaby for your weary thoughts. The gate is open. The path ahead is wide, soft, and entirely silent, and the heavy, protective walls of the past are standing guard behind you, ensuring that your transition into the vast, quiet night is perfectly, absolutely safe. The The silver light of the moon is catching the very top of the archway, casting a long, soft shadow that points directly toward the deep, restorative heart of the night. There is absolutely no need to look back, no need to hold on, and no need to wait. The ancient, heavy, and beautiful stones have done their work, and now they invite you to do yours, to simply, quietly, and completely let go, drifting forward into the infinite, peaceful, and starlit horizon that waits just beyond the final silent gate of the stone dragon. As you drift gently past the heavy shadowed threshold of that final gate, moving seamlessly into the vast, open, and incredibly silent horizon of the deep northwest, the very nature of the ancient architecture undergoes a profound, almost magical inversion. As the landscape slowly transitions into the vast rolling golden waves of the loose plateau, the deeply ingrained human concept of building a wall completely reverses itself. In this unique, sweeping terrain, the earth is made of incredibly fine, wind-blown, deeply compacted yellow silt that has patiently accumulated over millions of slow, quiet years. Instead of tirelessly stacking heavy stones upwards into the bright sky to create a soaring barrier, the ancient, brilliant engineers decided to simply dig deeply, quietly downwards. For hundreds of miles, they painstakingly carved massive, continuous, plunging trenches directly into the solid golden earth. It is a breathtaking negative space wall, a deeply hidden, beautifully sunken boundary that is entirely invisible from a distance. Walking through this sunken path feels like moving through a secret, deeply sheltered golden canyon. The air down here is incredibly cool, beautifully still, and heavily insulated from the scouring high-altitude winds above. The towering walls of sheer packed earth on either side offer a profound, enveloping sense of absolute protection, gently wrapping the weary traveller in a deep subterranean hush, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most profound safety is found not in building towering, arrogant defences, but in quietly, humbly lowering ourselves into the warm, waiting embrace of the earth. The creation of these massive earthen boundaries was not a silent, grueling endeavour of sheer, brute force, but rather a deeply rhythmic, beautifully musical collaboration. To transform the loose golden silt into a barrier as hard and resonant as solid granite, the ancient workers used incredibly heavy, carved wooden and stone tampers, lifting and dropping them thousands upon thousands of times. To perfectly synchronize their heavy, exhausting movements and to find a shared, enduring strength, the labourers sang deep, resonant, beautifully rolling work songs. The steady, slow, predictable tempo of these ancient melodies directly dictated the unified, heavy drop of the massive weights. The earth was literally physically packed and shaped to the exact rhythm of human music. This means that the towering, rammed earth walls of the Western Desert are not just a static, silent monument. They're a massive physical recording of an ancient communal song. The very density of the wall is a frozen permanent sound wave, a structural echo of deep, rhythmic harmony. To rest your hand against these golden layered mounds is to touch a quiet, petrified melody. A deeply moving realization that even the most monumental heavy tasks can be gracefully accomplished when we simply find a shared rhythm and allow the music to gently carry the heavy weight of the work. That ancient musical memory is still beautifully physically present in the resting stones of the far western passes, manifesting in a phenomenon that feels like pure auditory magic. At the imposing, deeply isolated fortress of Shanhaiguan, there is a specific, heavily weathered corner of the massive inner wall, known quietly as the Swallow Stone. If you take a small, smooth river pebble and gently, softly strike it against the dense, heavy brickwork in this exact, specific location, the architecture does not respond with a dull, heavy thud. Because of the incredible density of the vitrified bricks and the precise, sweeping geometric angles of the surrounding enclosed courtyard, the sound is magically caught, compressed, and beautifully transformed. The heavy stone instantly bounces the sound back as a bright, clear, echoing chirp, sounding exactly, perfectly like the cheerful, high-pitched call of a returning, darting swallow. The ancient, lonely guards believed these beautiful, echoing chirps were the comforting spirits of the birds, keeping them quiet company in the vast, empty desert. It is a stunning, deeply charming detail, a massive, unyielding, intimidating fortress of war that was inadvertently designed to softly, beautifully sing exactly like a tiny, fragile, joyful bird. Just as that heavy ancient stone effortlessly transforms a simple, quiet tap into a beautiful, weightless, soaring song, allow your own tired mind to effortlessly transform the heavy, lingering thoughts of the waking day into soft, weightless, smoothly passing dreams. The physical body grows delightfully heavy, sinking deeper into the quiet comfort of the mattress, while the breath settles into a slow, rhythmic, deeply reassuring tide. There is absolutely nothing you need to figure out and nothing you need to hold on to. Below those singing, echoing stones, the rich, deeply undisturbed soil holds a quiet, beautifully nurturing legacy left behind by the very guards who once listened to the swallows, stationed for unimaginably long, quiet years in incredibly remote, fiercely wild outposts. Completely isolated from the comforting care of their distant homes, the soldiers intuitively turned to the earth for healing. At the sheltered, sun-warmed base of the towering watchtowers, they carefully, patiently cultivated secret, sprawling miniature apothecaries. They planted incredibly resilient, deeply healing mountain herbs, the sweet, bright red, nourishing pearls of the wild goji berry, the deep yellow, heavily rooted astragalus for enduring strength, and the soothing, sweet-tasting wild licorice to calm the throat against the biting, dry desert wind. These delicate medicinal plants beautifully adapted to the unique protected microclimate created by the massive stone walls. Today, centuries after the heavy armor has rusted away to dust, these ancient, quiet medicinal gardens still happily, wildly thrive. The base of the wall is organically transformed into a vast, stretching, beautiful ribbon of natural healing, winding gracefully through the rugged wilderness, quietly offering its sweet medicinal bounty to the resting earth and the gentle, passing wildlife. Deep within the heavily forested, misty mountains far behind these ancient borders, the very same earth that grew those healing herbs recently revealed a perfectly preserved, deeply profound secret of gently paused time. While carefully surveying a dense, nearly impenetrable valley, dedicated archaeologists softly brushed away the thick emerald moss and heavy fallen pine needles to uncover a fully intact ancient brick kiln. It had been completely hidden, swallowed quietly by the forest. But the most breathtaking, deeply moving discovery was found waiting patiently inside the dark, domed firing chamber. Stacked meticulously, perfectly and neatly in absolute straight rows were hundreds of raw, beautifully shaped, unfired clay bricks. They were placed there on a quiet, unremarkable afternoon over 600 years ago, perfectly prepared for a roaring fire that, for unknown, deeply mysterious reasons, was simply never lit. The ancient brickmakers calmly set down their heavy tools, walked softly out of the deep valley and never returned. Time simply, beautifully, and completely stopped in that small, dark space. It is a profoundly peaceful, incredibly comforting image of an immense, demanding task that was simply left undone. It stands as a beautiful, silent monument to the gentle art of walking away, a deeply reassuring reminder that it is entirely acceptable to leave our work unfinished, safely resting in the quiet dark. There is a profound, deep, oceanic relief in knowing that absolutely not everything needs to be finished today. You can simply, quietly step away from the warm kilns of your own busy waking life, leaving the heavy, stacked thoughts exactly where they are. They will wait perfectly, patiently, and safely for you in the morning. Right now, your only task is to gently close the heavy door and sink comfortably into the soft, unhurried quiet of the night. up in the completed, heavily weathered watchtowers that were successfully built from those ancient kilns, the master masons utilised a deeply poetic, incredibly calming architectural technique that fundamentally changes how we view the surrounding wild world. The heavy, narrow stone windows of the highest pavilions were not merely carved as random defensive slits. They were meticulously, beautifully calculated, precisely positioned frames. The ancient builders masterfully employed the traditional quiet Chinese garden philosophy known beautifully as Jijing, which gracefully translates to borrowed scenery. They carefully aligned the deep, dark, heavy stone window frames to perfectly, flawlessly capture a specific, breathtaking view. Perhaps the jagged, snow-capped peak of a distant mountain, the soft, elegant, sweeping curve of a silver river far below, or a solitary, gracefully twisting ancient pine tree clinging to a nearby cliff. By framing these chaotic, wild elements within the rigid, calm, orderly square of the dark stone, they instantly transformed the overwhelming, vast wilderness into a series of serene, perfectly composed, permanent landscape paintings. Walking through the quiet, echoing towers feels exactly like strolling slowly through a hushed, beautiful, sky-high art gallery where the magnificent living earth itself is the quiet, eternal masterpiece on display. When you look gently through those heavy, dark stone frames in the crisp, profoundly still, cooling mornings of late autumn, that beautifully captured landscape often performs a breathtaking, completely silent vanishing act. A heavy, thick, deeply peaceful meteorological phenomenon known beautifully and accurately as the Yunhai, or the Sea of Clouds, settles heavily and deeply into the plunging mountain valleys. The dense, pristine, milky white fog completely obscures the deep forests, the winding rivers, and the sharp, plunging ravines. The only things that manage to pierce through this thick, blindingly white, silent blanket are the absolute highest, jagged mountain peaks and the tall, isolated, grey stone watchtowers. In these hushed, magical hours, the wall completely loses its connection to the heavy earth below. It appears to be a delicate, fragile, floating bridge of ancient stone, suspended weightlessly and effortlessly over an endless, silent, moving ocean of pure white cloud. The heavy grey towers become tiny, solitary, peaceful islands of refuge in the sky. To stand up here in the crisp, thinning air, looking out over the softly rolling white waves of mist, is to experience a profound, deeply detached sense of floating, absolute tranquility, completely untethered from the heavy, noisy, complicated world hidden far below the soft white surface. In one of those deeply mist-shrouded hidden valleys, slowly revealed as the heavy fog gently lifts, lies the spectacular, uniquely designed fortress of Shanhaiguan. Here, the strict, rigid, military architecture completely abandons the simple, aggressive straight line. Instead, the entire interior village, the heavy stone walls and the winding, narrow streets are laid out in the incredibly complex, swirling, deeply philosophical, ancient geometric pattern of the Bagua, or the 8 trigrams. It was originally designed to deliberately disorient any invading force, but today, stripped completely of its ancient hostility, it has become an immense, life-sized, incredibly beautiful architectural puzzle. It functions exactly like a massive meditative stone-paved labyrinth. Walking slowly through its quiet, circular, perfectly echoing streets gently, beautifully confuses the mind's rigid need for direction and absolute control. Every soft, curving turn looks identical to the last, gently forcing the weary traveller to completely give up the frantic rush to find the exit. It encourages a slow, peaceful, deeply yielding surrender to the winding, quiet path itself, quietly teaching the beautiful lesson that sometimes allowing ourselves to become gently, safely lost is the absolute best way to quiet the mind and find our deepest, most profound sense of resting center. Stepping softly out of that dizzying, quiet, meditative stone maze, the wall sometimes takes on an almost impossible gravity-defying grace that mimics the very mythology of the land. In the sweeping golden foothills of the Gobi Desert, a specific dramatic section beautifully known as the Zhuanbi, or the overhanging wall, leaps suddenly and breathtakingly up a staggering 45-degree sheer mountain ridge. Because it is built from the pale golden earth and tightly hugs the undulating sharp spine of the mountain, from a slight distance, it does not look like a rigid human-made fortification at all. Instead, it forms a massive, perfect, stunning optical illusion. It looks exactly like an immense, ancient resting golden dragon that has gracefully, beautifully stretched its long, heavy ridged neck down from the high, silent, snowy peaks to take a slow, cooling, peaceful drink from the rushing, clear waters of the Taolai River far below in the valley. The architecture does not fight the mountain. It literally embodies the ancient resting spirit of the landscape. It is a magnificent, deeply settling visual poem, a colossal, mythological creature forever frozen in a moment of quiet, peaceful, slaking rest at the very edge of the vast, dry, whispering desert. Far, far to the east, drifting back through thousands of years of deep time, rests an even older, deeper, quieter ancestor of that resting stone dragon. In the gentle, humid, rolling, incredibly green hills of Shandong province lies the ancient Great Wall of Qi. Built many centuries before the towering famous Ming fortresses were even a fleeting thought, this deeply ancient barrier has completely, beautifully and willingly surrendered its sharp, heavy edges to the soft, patient earth. There is absolutely no heavy grey brick here, no towering, intimidating watchtowers, and no deep, carved arrow slits. It is now merely a gentle, rolling, elongated green spine running quietly through the deep, silent, deciduous forests. It is heavily, warmly blanketed in incredibly soft, vibrant emerald moss and deeply shaded by ancient, sweeping, broadleaf trees. You could easily walk right over this soft, grassy ripple in the forest floor without ever knowing you were crossing one of the oldest, most massive borders in human history. It is the ultimate, beautiful, deeply comforting conclusion of all heavy human effort, a quiet, gentle, inevitable return to the soft, enduring and peaceful embrace of the natural world, proving beautifully that all sharp, rigid things eventually soften, melt, and find their eternal peace. As that ancient, incredibly soft, grassy spine slowly, beautifully blends into the deepening shadows of the resting forest, the night air cools, gently inviting an even more profound, heavy quiet to settle completely over the sleeping stones, opening the door to the deepest, most tranquil hours of the ancient night. In the very heart of that tranquil ancient night, beneath the protective, heavy shadows of the towering Juyongguan Pass, lies a magnificent, solid structure made of pure white marble that quietly offers a gentle, eternal blessing to the resting world. This is the Cloud Terrace. Long ago it served as the heavy, ornate, elevated base for 3 magnificent soaring stupas, but today only the massive, intricately carved archway remains. If you were to walk slowly through this deep, echoing tunnel, illuminating the dark, cooling stone with a soft, warm, flickering lantern, you would see that the smooth white marble is entirely covered in incredibly intricate, deeply carved reliefs. You would find the soft curves of delicate lotus flowers, the strong, calm faces of heavenly guardians, and thousands of tiny, perfectly formed characters. These are ancient, peaceful Buddhist sutras, painstakingly carved into the rock in 6 completely different ancient scripts, including Tibetan, Sanskrit, and Fagspa. This magnificent heavy stone arch was intentionally designed as a massive permanent prayer for profound peace. The ancient architects believed that anyone who simply walked quietly beneath this archway, whether a weary traveller, a heavily burdened merchant, or a solitary exhausted guard, would be softly, invisibly washed by these sacred words, receiving a gentle, resting blessing from the stone itself. It is a profoundly comforting thought that the architecture here doesn't just physically defend the earthly body, it actively, continuously and silently blesses the passing spirit, wrapping every single traveller in a timeless heavy blanket of ancient goodwill. High above that blessed marble terrace, reaching further up into the cool, thinning air than almost any other structure on the eastern mountain ranges, sits a massive, solitary, awe-inspiring fortress, beautifully known as the Nine-Eye Tower. While most standard, humble watchtowers feature only a few narrow windows for observation, this colossal, square structure was built on an incredibly grand sweeping scale, boasting 9 massive arched observation windows on each of its 4 heavy stone sides. In the profound, ringing silence of the high-altitude night, this towering structure functions exactly like a massive, beautifully constructed lantern, catching the soft light of the spinning cosmos. With 36 distinct, perfectly proportioned stone frames, it captures the surrounding vast universe from every conceivable, breathtaking angle. To stand directly in the centre of this massive, empty, beautifully echoing room is to be surrounded by 36 perfect living paintings, the silver, slow-moving moon caught gracefully in one arch, the glittering, dense, cloudy band of the Milky Way spanning another, and the deep, sleeping, velvety black of the plunging valley held gently in a third. It is the ultimate, profound observatory of quietness, a place where the human need to vigilantly watch the horizon transforms beautifully into an endless panoramic embrace of the deep, restful night sky. As your gaze slowly drops from those 36 framed starry skies to the heavy winding pathways leading away from the tower, the specific unique design of the Mutianyu section offers an incredibly rare, deeply comforting architectural embrace. In almost every other sprawling region, the Great Wall only features its protective crenellated teeth, the high, shielding parapets, on the single, northern-facing edge, standing guard against the harsh, unknown expanse. But here, gracefully winding through incredibly lush, dense, steeply rolling forests, the ancient builders constructed high, heavy, protective parapets on both sides of the wide, paved stone walkway. This brilliant, unique choice fundamentally shifts the entire feeling of standing on the wall. Instead of feeling like you are balancing precariously on the absolute sharp edge of a boundary, you are completely, deeply, and beautifully held within a solid, heavy cradle of ancient stone. The sheer, plunging drops on either side are safely, entirely blocked from view, leaving only a clear, sweeping, deeply protected stone avenue stretching peacefully ahead. It creates a profound, resting sensation of absolute bilateral safety, a heavily armoured, beautiful corridor where the weary traveller is completely, deeply shielded from all possible sides, gently cocooned within the unshakable, resting strength of the mountain itself. That profound, unshakable sense of being safely, completely held is exactly what your own resting body is experiencing right now. The heavy, protective walls of the quiet night are rising softly on all sides of you, effortlessly blocking out the sheer, steep drops and the chaotic, rushing demands of the waking world. You are entirely cocooned, deeply supported, and completely safe to just drift further down the quiet, winding path of your own gentle breath. This quiet, winding path occasionally asks for a beautiful, humbling surrender from those who choose to walk it. In the fiercely wild, spectacularly jagged, untamed section, known beautifully as Jiangku, the mountain ridges become so impossibly steep and narrow that the ancient stone architecture is forced to perform a staggering near-vertical leap. This breathtaking, seemingly impossible ascent is poetically called the Heavenly Ladder. The massive, deeply weathered stone steps here are so incredibly narrow and the rising angle so dramatically sharp that it is completely impossible to walk up them in a proud, standing, upright posture. Instead, the sheer, staggering geometry of the mountain gently, firmly demands that the traveller use both their hands and their feet pulling themselves upward, step by slow, heavy step. Without any conscious intention, the architecture itself forces every single person who climbs it into a deep, physical posture of profound reverence and low, heavy bowing. It is a deeply humbling, remarkably beautiful interaction between human geometry and ancient geology. The mountain quietly teaches us that to reach the absolute highest, most breathtaking, deeply peaceful vantage points, we must first be willing to lower ourselves, to touch the earth with our own bare hands, and to approach the sheer, immense scale of the world with a quiet, grounded, deeply respectful humility. When you place your bare hands directly against those incredibly steep ancient steps, you are touching a substance that holds a deeply invisible, microscopic magic. The famous sticky rice mortar that binds these massive grey stones together does far more than just flex and hold. It actively, silently purifies the structure. Because the boiled rice soup was meticulously, heavily mixed with deeply roasted slaked lime, the resulting ancient mortar has an incredibly high sustained pH level. It is highly, beautifully alkaline. This means that for over 600 long, damp, humid, rainy summers, the very chemical nature of the wall has acted as an invisible, microscopic guardian. It naturally completely repels the deep, destructive rot of heavy molds and the corrosive spread of acidic, decay-causing bacteria. The wall literally silently cleanses itself at a cellular level, preventing the slow, insidious spread of damp decay that reclaims most other ancient ruins. It is a profoundly comforting, entirely hidden layer of molecular protection. Even when the massive, sweeping structure appears entirely abandoned by human caretakers, left completely alone to face the brutal, overwhelming forces of the untamed wild, it is still quietly, successfully defending its own core. It maintains a pristine, resting chemical purity that beautifully and effortlessly resists the chaotic, breaking forces of time, remaining pristine from the inside out. Because of that enduring, purified, deep inner strength, the oldest, most heavily crumbled, softly decaying sections of the wall have become highly sought after, incredibly safe, and deeply warm sanctuaries for the shyest, most beautiful residents of the forest. In the hollowed, dark, completely silent ruins of collapsed lower watchtowers, where the heavy roof stones have gently given way to the open sky, wild red foxes frequently and happily make their soft hidden dens. They seek out the deeply piled, dry sandy earth that has slowly accumulated in the protected corners, completely shielded from the biting, scouring mountain winds. In the quiet, cool blue hours of the early dawn, a mother fox will lead her tiny, incredibly soft, playful kits out onto the ancient, sun-warmed, heavy grey bricks to bask in the first, gentle, golden rays of the morning light. The massive, intimidating military structure, originally built to forcefully project human dominance and fear, is now being used as a quiet, warm, sun-baked nursery for delicate wildlife. It is a stunning, heart-melting, deeply reassuring image, the harsh, sharp, serious edges of ancient history completely, beautifully repurposed into a soft, safe resting cradle for the most innocent, playful and gentle creatures of the sleeping woods. Just as those tiny, soft creatures find a perfectly safe, warm, protected hollow within the massive ancient stones, your own resting mind has found a quiet, deeply secure, perfectly still harbour in the centre of the night. The thoughts become smaller, softer, and incredibly quiet, curling up safely in the warm, heavy shadows. There is absolutely no need to be alert or on guard. You can simply let the quiet, comforting warmth of the stillness wash completely over you. As that comforting warmth spreads, consider the astonishing, massive thermal impact the wall has on the sprawling, sweeping landscape around it. The Great Wall is not just a line drawn on a map. It is a massive, towering, three-dimensional physical presence that literally shapes the local weather. Because it stands so high and stretches so continuously for thousands of uninterrupted miles, it casts an unimaginably massive moving shadow. During the absolute hottest, most blindingly bright, scorching hours of the deep summer afternoon, the northern shaded side of the wall creates its own, completely distinct, cooling microclimate. The temperature in this deep, sweeping, miles-long shadow can be significantly, beautifully cooler than the surrounding sun-baked earth. It creates a vast, continuous dark ribbon of profound thermal relief stretching across the entire continent. Weary travellers, migrating herds of wild deer, and completely exhausted nomadic shepherds have used this massive, miles-long stripe of shade for centuries as a place to safely, deeply, and comfortably rest during the overwhelming heat of the day. The wall literally functions as an endless, deeply generous stone parasol, quietly offering a cool, dark, deeply refreshing sanctuary to anyone and anything seeking a quiet moment of absolute, resting relief. If you were to rest deeply within that cool, miles-long shadow and slowly make your way into the heavily fortified inner courtyards of the grandest, most complex mountain passes, you would encounter a shape that feels completely, beautifully out of place among the rigid, sharp, militaristic squares and heavy rectangles. Tucked quietly away in the deeply protected, serene inner sections are stunning, perfectly carved, completely circular stone archways known beautifully as moon gates. These smooth, elegant, flawlessly round doorways were painstakingly carved to perfectly mimic the shape of the full resting moon. In traditional ancient Chinese philosophy, the perfect circle represents absolute wholeness, deep, unbroken unity, and the seamless, eternal perfection of the resting heavens. To step slowly through a moon gate is to symbolically, beautifully step out of the chaotic, jagged, unpredictable earthly realm and pass directly into a space of complete celestial peace. It is a breathtaking, deeply softening architectural choice. The ancient builders intentionally placed these perfect, sweeping circles of smooth stone amidst the heavy, aggressive fortifications to provide a physical, beautiful passage of absolute tranquility. A quiet, gentle reminder that even in the absolute centre of a fortress, one can always find a pathway back to total, unbroken wholeness. Passing smoothly through that perfect circular representation of the heavens, we are beautifully reminded of the staggering, almost incomprehensible, earthly scale of this single, continuous creation. The Great Wall does not merely sit in one region. It majestically, tirelessly weaves its way across an astonishing 15 different provinces, municipalities, and autonomous regions. In doing so, it interacts with nearly every single, beautiful, sweeping texture the vast continent has to gently offer. It anchors itself securely in the rich, iron-heavy, dark red clay of the Central Plains. It rests heavily and majestically on the blindingly white, crystalline, freezing snowcaps of the highest jagged peaks. It sinks softly into the pale, shifting, whispering golden sands of the deep western deserts, and it wades quietly and smoothly into the frothing, deep blue, salty surf of the eastern sea. It crosses deep, mist-filled river gorges and vast, sun-baked, endless steppes. The wall is not just one colour or one texture. It is a massive, continent-spanning ribbon that holds the entire, breathtaking, natural palette of the earth in its heavy stones. It is a unifying, profoundly expanding realization. It shows us softly that something can be incredibly, unbreakably continuous and whole, while perfectly, naturally adapting to and reflecting the wildly diverse, ever-changing, resting environments it passes through. Just as the wall seamlessly, effortlessly adapts to the changing, sweeping colours of the earth without ever losing its continuous, steady path, you too can allow the deeply changing, shifting landscapes of your own dreams to simply wash over you. You're the continuous, heavy, resting stone, perfectly grounded and deeply still, while the soft, colourful, weightless images of sleep simply drift gently by, requiring absolutely no effort, no judgment, and no response at all. And as those soft, weightless dreams begin to gather, the wall offers one final, profoundly comforting lesson in the quiet beauty of letting go. In the deeply historic, sweeping section known as Gubeku, the ancient, heavy architecture has never been thoroughly restored, rebuilt, or polished for modern eyes. It wears the incredibly heavy, violent scars of deep history openly, including the deep, pockmarked impacts of modern 20th century conflicts. Yet, because it has been left completely, utterly alone, nature has performed a breathtaking, sweeping act of gentle forgiveness. The once sharp, broken edges of the shattered bricks have been beautifully, completely rounded and softened by decades of patient, sweeping rain and rushing high-altitude wind. The deep, violent craters are now entirely warmly filled with soft, emerald moss and tiny, fragile, deeply resilient yellow wildflowers. The wall here does not look like a pristine, arrogant monument of victory. It looks like a profoundly resting, deeply weary elder who has finally laid down their heavy armour and found absolute, unshakable peace. It is the ultimate, beautiful proof that even the most broken, deeply scarred and heavily battered things in this world can eventually be completely, softly reclaimed by the gentle, patient, enduring beauty of the wild earth, transforming a site of ancient conflict into a masterpiece of deep, abiding, and eternal tranquility. That eternal, abiding tranquility of the winter landscape holds another, deeply invisible, frozen memory of exactly how these massive, sweeping structures were originally born from the earth. We often imagine the back-breaking, exhausting labour of dragging impossibly heavy, solid granite blocks across the jagged, uneven, unyielding terrain. But the ancient builders possessed a brilliant, quiet wisdom that perfectly, gracefully utilised the freezing elements of the natural world. In the absolute deepest, darkest depths of the mountain winter, when the temperature plummeted far below freezing and the very air seemed to crackle with the cold, the workers would methodically, patiently, pour buckets of clear river water along the winding dirt paths leading up to the high construction sites. Overnight, the silent, freezing air would magically transform these muddy, impassable trails into perfectly smooth, frictionless, glittering ribbons of solid, pale blue ice. The next morning, the impossibly heavy multi-ton blocks of quarried stone could be slid effortlessly, smoothly, and silently up the steepest mountainsides on heavy wooden sledges, gliding exactly like weightless, wooden ships sailing over a frozen, glassy sea. It is a profoundly beautiful, deeply calming image, the heaviest, most unyielding burdens of the world being moved with absolute gliding ease, simply by waiting patiently for the natural freezing chill of the winter night to softly, gently pave the way. Following that smooth, frictionless path of ice upward, we arrive at the very crown of the ancient fortifications, where the architecture beautifully, silently adapts to the sweeping, ever-changing moods of the sky above. If you were to float weightlessly above the vast network, looking closely at the heavy, fired clay roofs of the isolated watchtowers, you would notice a stunning rhythmic variation designed to perfectly embrace the local weather. In the deeply arid, wind-swept, dry western deserts, the heavy stone roofs are perfectly, beautifully flat, purposefully designed to patiently catch and pool every single, precious, rare drop of rain or melting snow. As you move smoothly eastward into the humid, lush, monsoon-drenched mountains, the roofs gracefully, dramatically peak and slope, adorned with beautifully carved, sweeping eaves designed to effortlessly shed the heavy, drumming, cascading downpours of the sudden summer storms. And inside, looking up from the cool, worn stone floors, many ceilings are elegantly, masterfully vaulted into smooth, sweeping, dark domes. The massive structure is not just a blind, rigid, unchanging wall. It is a deeply responsive, wonderfully intelligent system of shelters, beautifully bowing and shaping itself to the eternal, rhythmic dance of the falling rain and the drifting high-altitude snow. To step softly inside one of those beautifully vaulted, cool stone towers is to discover a hidden, mesmerizing geometry that draws the tired mind slowly, peacefully inward. Because space was incredibly limited within these thick, heavily armoured defensive walls, the ancient stonemasons could not build wide, sweeping, straight staircases to reach the upper observation decks. Instead, they carved narrow, brilliantly tight, spiralling steps that wind smoothly and elegantly upward, hugging the rounded, dark interior corners of the stone. This winding, ascending pathway perfectly mathematically mimics the beautiful, natural, sweeping spiral of a nautilus shell resting deeply on the ocean floor. Over centuries of use, the heavy, rough edges of these spiraling stone steps have been beautifully, completely polished by the soft, repeated tread of thousands of ancient cloth-wrapped shoes. Today, they are as smooth, cool and comforting as a dark river stone worn softly by a gentle, endless current. Walking slowly up these spiraling enclosed steps feels like a deep, meditative journey inward, gently winding away from the expansive, overwhelming vastness of the outside world and spiraling safely, quietly, into a deeply protected, perfectly quiet, heavy centre. Just as that winding, smooth stone pathway draws you safely and quietly inward, simply allow the natural, unhurried spiral of your own breath to draw your awareness deeply into the resting centre of your own body. The heavy muscles of the legs and the arms naturally, beautifully soften, releasing their tight, waking grip, completely surrendering to the warm, comforting, heavy gravity of the bed. You are perfectly secure within this quiet, spiraling shell of rest, allowing the busy, chaotic, bright signals of the outside world to gently, completely fade away into the cool, dark, protective stone. In the ancient, misty past, when thick, blinding, impenetrable fogs rolled heavily through these plunging mountain passes, completely swallowing the towering structures and blinding the quiet guards, the visual signals of rising smoke and bright fire were entirely useless. In these deeply hushed, heavily clouded moments, the wall completely shifted its sensory language from the visual to the deeply, resonantly auditory. The solitary guards would carefully unfurl massive, heavy silk flags that whipped and snapped with a low rhythmic thud in the rushing, unseen mountain wind, and they would slowly, methodically, strike immense, deep-timbered, thick leather drums. The incredibly low, resonant, vibrating heartbeat of the massive drum would travel effortlessly through the thick, white, blinding fog, echoing beautifully, perfectly, and endlessly down the invisible, winding valley. You could literally feel the deep, low vibration humming softly in the very centre of your chest. It is a profoundly comforting, deeply settling realization. Even when we cannot see the path ahead, even when the waking world is completely obscured by a thick, heavy, confusing mist, there is always a deep, underlying rhythmic heartbeat, a resonant, steady vibration of connection that quietly assures us we are never truly alone in the dark, following the low, fading, deeply soothing echo of that drumbeat far to the distant west. The ancient architecture perfectly, beautifully merges with the steady, calming flow of deep water. Deep within a dramatic, incredibly steep, plunging gorge in Xinjiang lies the formidable, silently resting Iron Gate Pass. It earned its fierce, heavy name from the incredibly dark, deeply metallic, iron-rich rock of the towering sheer cliffs that tightly embrace it. But this intimidating, dark, heavy stone is perfectly, beautifully softened by the continuous presence of the Conquet River, known poetically and beautifully as the Peacock River, which rushes gently and continuously right through the absolute centre of the narrow gorge. The deep, heavy, shadowed black of the ancient, towering rocks perfectly mirrors the brilliant, shimmering, vibrant blue-green, jewel-like tones of the moving water. When the night falls, the dark, glassy surface of the river perfectly catches the tiny shimmering reflections of 1,000,000 silver stars. The imposing, dark, heavy permanence of the iron stone quietly watches over the fluid, eternal, soft, dancing motion of the river. It is a stunning, deeply relaxing display of natural balance, the absolute unyielding stillness of the heavy mountain happily, peacefully, providing a safe, deep, quiet cradle for the endless, moving, graceful journey of the rushing water. In a completely different era, far from the deep, dark gorges and the heavy metallic stones, the very concept of the Great Wall softened entirely, fundamentally transforming from a rigid, petrified, heavy barrier into a living, swaying, breathing forest. During the expansive, incredibly quiet later centuries of the Ming Dynasty, the emperors completely abandoned the exhausting practice of baking heavy clay bricks and quarrying massive granite blocks. Instead, they constructed a sprawling, vast boundary beautifully and softly known as the Willow Palisade. They carved a deep, continuous, quiet earthen trench and planted the heavily mounded banks with thousands upon thousands of weeping willow trees. Over the quiet, passing, gentle years, these trees grew massive, their deep, incredibly strong, thirsty roots weaving together into an impenetrable, underground holding net, while their long, sweeping, delicate, pale green branches swayed softly and hypnotically in the gentle, carrying prairie wind. The wall became a massive, continent-spanning ribbon of soft, rustling leaves, a boundary made entirely of dappled shade, gentle, sweeping movement, and the soothing, continuous whispering sound of the wind moving softly through the swaying branches. It is a breathtaking, beautiful reminder that true, enduring boundaries do not always need to be harsh, heavy, and unforgiving. They can be soft, living, remarkably flexible, and deeply, beautifully alive. As you imagine the soft, hypnotic, slow swaying of those long green willow branches sweeping gently back and forth in the warm evening breeze, allow your own tired mind to simply, peacefully sway along with them. Every slow, deep breath you take is exactly like that gentle, sweeping wind, softly rustling through the heavy canopy of your thoughts, gently loosening them and carrying them effortlessly away into the vast, open, darkening sky. The body sinks deeper, the breath settles further, and the mind is beautifully, entirely free to just gracefully, weightlessly drift. If you were to gently approach the heavy, ancient grey bricks of the older, forgotten mountain sections and look incredibly closely, zooming in entirely on the heavily weathered, deeply textured surface of the stone, you would discover an entirely different microscopic forest quietly, patiently thriving. Botanists have carefully catalogued over 50 distinct, incredibly beautiful species of lichen slowly, peacefully growing directly on the mortar and stone of the Great Wall. This is a quiet, hidden, microscopic world of stunning, vibrant colour bursting from the dull grey rock, bright, sun-baked, brilliant orange, deep, powdery, silver green, and pale, delicate, mustard yellow. These tiny, incredibly resilient organisms grow at a pace so unimaginably slow that a single, circular, pale patch the size of a small silver coin may have been quietly expanding for over an entire century. They are exactly like tiny, dry, ancient coral reefs blooming silently on the steep mountainside. They do not aggressively conquer or destroy the stone. They gently chemically bond with it, slowly, patiently returning the heavy minerals back to the living earth. It is a profoundly beautiful, deeply calming lesson in the immense quiet power of slow, unhurried, steady, microscopic growth. They quietly prove that even the absolute smallest, most delicate, slowest moving life can beautifully, colourfully transform the heaviest, most ancient stones of human history, one microscopic, incredibly patient millimetre at a time. From that vibrant, microscopic, incredibly slow-moving world resting on the surface of the brick, the perspective slowly, smoothly expands outward again to encompass one of the oldest, most deeply resting, and most heavily weathered ancestors of the entire defensive network. Deep in the remote, sprawling, utterly silent steppes of Inner Mongolia, resting heavily and quietly against the jagged, dark base of the Yin Mountains lies the ancient wall of Zhao. Built over 2,300 years ago, this deeply ancient structure predates the famous towering Ming brick fortresses by many long, quiet centuries. There is absolutely no sticky rice mortar here, no fired clay, and no heavy, smoothly carved archways. It was constructed using a deeply ancient technique known as dry stacking, where local, incredibly dark volcanic basalt stones were simply, painstakingly, and perfectly balanced upon one another by ancient, careful, unhurried hands. Today, after millennia of heavy, burying snows and sweeping, whistling winds, it has slumped beautifully and gently into a low, undulating, dark, heavy ridge. It looks exactly like a quiet, dark, petrified river of black stone gently winding its way through the pale, silvery green, endless waving grasses of the open steppe. It is the absolute most beautiful picture of ancient exhaustion gracefully surrendering to eternal rest. A massive, heavy structure that has entirely given up the fight against time, choosing instead to simply lie down peacefully in the tall grass and quietly, beautifully become one with the soft earth. When the deep, heavy indigo shadows of the evening slowly creep across those low, dark, resting stones of the Zhao wall, a profound, breathtaking celestial alignment is beautifully, silently revealed to the quiet observer. The ancient astronomers and brilliant builders of the later dynasties did not just look down at the jagged earth when planning their massive, winding fortresses. They looked deeply, reverently, and constantly up into the spinning, star-dusted velvet of the deep night sky. In ancient, traditional Chinese cosmology, the magnificent, glowing, cloudy band of the Milky Way galaxy was poetically and beautifully known as the Silver River. Certain, massive, sweeping sections of the Great Wall were intentionally beautifully designed and aligned to physically, directly mirror the exact winding, flowing path of this celestial river across the earth. When the vast, dark night reaches its absolute deepest, most quiet, hushed hour, the winding, endless ribbon of pale, grey stone resting heavily on the mountains perfectly reflects the winding, endless ribbon of shimmering silver stars glowing softly, brilliantly above it. It creates a deeply profound, breathtaking symmetry, as beautifully above, so heavily below. The wall becomes a literal, physical, massive anchor for the heavens, a grounding, heavy, earthly reflection of the vast, silent, infinite cosmos, beautifully uniting the sleeping, heavy earth with the spinning, weightless, profound magic of the deep, starry night. The absolute, ultimate expression of that deep, cosmic, infinite silence arrives quietly and softly with the very first, heavy, drifting snows of the deep mountain winter. When the temperature drops perfectly, and the thick, grey, heavy clouds settle deeply and heavily over the high, winding ridges, the snow begins to fall in massive, thick, completely silent, delicate crystalline flakes. As millions of these soft, intricate geometric crystals land gently on the heavy grey parapets, the smooth stone walkways, and the surrounding, deeply sleeping pine forests, they perform a breathtaking act of absolute physical dampening. The deep, porous, crystalline structure of the fresh, heavy, incredibly soft snow literally absorbs and beautifully traps the chaotic sound waves of the world. Every single sharp echo, every whistling gust of rushing mountain wind, and every distant breaking branch is completely, beautifully muffled and swallowed by the pure, bright white blanket. The harsh, visually chaotic grey and green landscape is instantly transformed into a smooth, pristine, minimalist painting of pure white and deep resting shadow. The wall enters a state of perfect, absolute acoustic zero. It is a silence so deep, so profoundly rich, insulating, and heavy, that you can almost hear the quiet, slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the ancient stones themselves. The massive, winding dragon of the mountains goes completely, beautifully and peacefully to sleep under this thick, insulating, bright white cover, leaving nothing but the soft, muffled, incredibly deep, resting quiet of a world that has finally, entirely, and wonderfully stopped to rest. When the deep, frozen slumber of the mountain winter finally begins to yield to the gentle, warming breath of early spring, that thick, acoustic blanket of pure white snow initiates a beautiful liquid transformation. The millions of soft, trapped crystals slowly, willingly surrender to the increasing golden sunlight, melting down into countless tiny silver rivulets of clear, freezing water. As this massive, slow-motion thaw cascades gracefully down the steep forested slopes, it inevitably encounters the massive stone barrier of the Great Wall, but the ancient architecture does not stubbornly dam or fight the rushing flow. In beautifully engineered deep valleys like the Shanhaiguan or Water Pass, the brilliant ancient builders constructed magnificent sweeping stone archways directly over the rushing rivers, fitting them securely with massive heavy iron grates. As the newly freed rushing snowmelt pours gracefully and powerfully through these thick iron bars, the deep narrow valley is instantly filled with a continuous melodic liquid chiming. The heavy dark iron and the rushing crystal clear water collaborate effortlessly to create a vast natural water-driven instrument. If you were to stand quietly on the smooth, wet paving stones directly above this rushing water gate, you could feel the incredibly fresh, highly oxygenated, cool mist rising up to gently brush against your face. The air here smells remarkably clean, a pure, unburdened mixture of wet, crushed pine needles, cold, smoothed river stones, and the sharp, revitalizing scent of melting ice. It is a deeply purifying atmospheric rush that naturally, effortlessly clears the mind, washing away any lingering heavy clouds of thought and leaving only a crisp, sparkling, brilliant clarity in its wake. That crystal clear rushing snowmelt also gently, quietly, nourishes the very roots of the surrounding wild mountain flora, slowly awakening a microscopic world that holds one of the wall's most breathtaking, deeply hidden secrets. We know ancient builders used thick, boiling, sticky rice soup to bind the heavy bricks together, but modern botanists, peering through powerful microscopes, have discovered something incredibly beautiful caught within that ancient alkaline grip. Perfectly, flawlessly preserved inside the centuries-old, rock-hard mortar are thousands upon thousands of microscopic golden grains of ancient pollen. When the quiet workers were rhythmically mixing the heavy, wet lime and rice on the sun-drenched hillsides over 600 years ago, the passing, gentle spring breezes naturally seamlessly carried the floating, invisible dust of blooming mountain peaches, wild apricots, and delicate, pale hawthorn flowers directly into the wet clay. The wall is quite literally physically breathing with the preserved, microscopic memory of a specific, brilliantly blooming spring afternoon from half a millennium ago. It is a stunning, mind-expanding shift in scale and perspective. The absolute largest, heaviest, most intimidating military structure on the face of the earth is simultaneously, quietly serving as a flawless, microscopic time capsule for the most fragile, ephemeral, and delicate things the natural world has to safely offer. The weightless, floating golden dust of ancient, long-forgotten flowers. It is profoundly comforting to deeply realize that absolutely nothing truly beautiful is ever entirely lost to time. It simply waits patiently in the dark, held warmly within the stones, until the light finds it again. Just as that ancient golden pollen is perfectly, silently preserved within the heavy mortar, a similarly beautiful living time capsule has been gently, faithfully guarded by the very people who have lived in the deep, protective shadows of the wall for centuries. In small, incredibly remote, deeply quiet farming villages clustered tightly around the crumbling ancient garrison forts, the local residents still speak a uniquely beautiful, highly distinct, deeply rhythmic dialect that sounds entirely different from the language of the modern, bustling cities far below. Dedicated linguists have discovered that these quiet, humble communities are speaking an almost perfectly preserved, phonetic version of the specific military language used during the early sweeping Ming Dynasty. Because their ancestors were stationed in these isolated sky-high outposts and simply, peacefully never left after the great empires faded, their daily rhythmic speech became a softly isolated, deeply protected island of ancient sound. When a local grandmother softly calls out to her grandchildren in the cool blue dusk, or when neighbours murmur quiet, friendly greetings over the low, stacked stone fences, they are literally, physically speaking, the exact same warm, resonant syllables that echoed across these very watchtowers 600 years ago. It is a stunning, deeply humanizing continuation, a massive wall made not of heavy grey brick or packed earth, but of warm, continuous, unbroken human breath and the deeply comforting, familiar sounds of home. Allow the comforting, rhythmic, unbroken cadence of that ancient, softly spoken language to gently, seamlessly merge with the slow, steady rhythm of your own resting breath. You do not need to understand the specific words to completely, deeply feel the warmth and the profound, resting safety they gently carry. The physical body responds perfectly to this steady, unbroken continuity, sinking even deeper into the mattress, growing delightfully heavier and completely trusting the soft, supportive, quiet environment that seamlessly surrounds you. Following the soft, echoing warmth of those ancient syllables deeper into the beautifully preserved winding sections of Jinshanling, you might suddenly encounter an architectural feature so deeply, profoundly peaceful, that it completely defies the wall's original harsh, martial purpose. Standing directly in front of the entrances to certain watchtowers are massive, beautifully carved stone structures known as spirit screen walls. These ornate barriers were strategically designed to gently block straight-line winds from entering the living quarters. But what makes them truly breathtaking is the incredibly deep, intricate, beautiful artwork carved into their smooth faces. Rather than depicting fierce, intimidating dragons or aggressive, terrifying tigers, the ancient masons lovingly, patiently carved the image of the Xilin. In ancient, quiet mythology, the Xilin is a creature of such profound, absolute gentleness and infinite compassion that it floats softly, weightlessly over the earth, refusing to even step on a single, living blade of wild grass or harm a tiny wandering insect. To place the ultimate, eternal symbol of absolute, non-violent, protective peace at the very entrance of a heavy military fortress is a deeply moving, beautiful contradiction. It is a quiet, monumental prayer carved directly into heavy stone, a constant, gentle reminder to the weary guards that their true, deepest purpose was never violence, but the careful preservation of harmony, absolute gentleness, and enduring, resting peace. That profound, ancient, deeply carved respect for the delicate living world is beautifully physically demonstrated in the way the massive, heavy stone structure occasionally defers entirely to the quiet majesty of the natural forest. We instinctively assume that the construction of such an unstoppable, colossal, continent-spanning barrier would aggressively, ruthlessly clear absolutely everything in its strict mathematical, unforgiving path. Yet, in several incredibly remote, heavily forested mountain passes, the sweeping, rigid line of the Great Wall suddenly, gracefully and intentionally curves. The ancient, exhausted architects actually chose to alter the fundamental geometry of the entire fortress to actively, carefully avoid cutting down solitary, magnificent, deeply ancient Chinese pine trees. Some of these breathtaking, gnarled, twisting, dark green giants were already over 1,000 years old when the very first heavy foundation stones were being laid in the surrounding earth. the master builders recognized that the deep, silent, sweeping life of the ancient tree was far more sacred, far more enduring, and entirely more valuable than a perfectly straight, arrogant line of stone. Today, the heavy grey brickwork curves softly, beautifully and respectfully around these towering, fragrant living pillars, treating them exactly like honoured ancient elders holding court on the mountain. It is a deeply humbling, profoundly calming image of respectful, quiet coexistence. Human ambition gracefully, beautifully yielding its heavy right of way to the slow, patient, magnificent endurance of the deep, breathing forest. When the deep, heavy, velvet night finally falls over those ancient, protected, twisting pine trees, the very stone that so respectfully curves around them begins to quietly reveal a subtle, hidden, celestial magic. In specific high-altitude sections built entirely from massive, heavy blocks of locally quarried granite, the unyielding stone is heavily speckled with raw crystals of pure white quartz. During the bright, glaring hours of the busy day, these dull crystals are entirely invisible, blending seamlessly into the rough, grey, heavily weathered rock. But when the vast dark sky finally clears and the full, heavy silver moon rises majestically above the plunging, jagged ridges, the architecture undergoes a breathtaking, silent, magical transformation. The millions of embedded microscopic quartz facets perfectly, brilliantly catch and reflect the cold, pure silver moonlight. As you walk slowly along the dark, silent, elevated parapets, the entire massive structure appears to softly, beautifully glitter and spark from deep within. It looks exactly as if the dark, heavy mountain itself has been lightly dusted with the very same shimmering silver stars that blanket the vast, infinite, spinning sky above. The wall completely sheds its heavy, earthy, military weight and becomes a floating, glittering, ethereal pathway of pure, soft light. It is a deeply mesmerizing, profoundly hypnotic sight, a vast, miles-long, quiet constellation, resting perfectly, peacefully right here on the sleeping, silent earth. Imagine the soft, silver, glittering light of those ancient, resting quartz crystals gently, smoothly washing over your own tired mind. It is a cool, clear, beautifully purifying light that effortlessly, quietly dissolves the heavy, complicated, chaotic thoughts of the busy waking day. The mind becomes exactly like that quiet, moonlit stone, still, vast, incredibly peaceful, and gently reflecting only the softest, most beautiful resting light of the deep night. Following that glittering silver moonlit pathway westward, the heavy stone architecture eventually intersects with another, entirely different, profoundly peaceful, ancient journey. In the sweeping, rugged, deeply shadowed western provinces, the Great Wall served as the grand, formal, heavy gates for the legendary, incredibly ancient Tea-Horse Road. This was a sprawling, massive, deeply quiet network of narrow, winding, mountainous trade routes, dedicated almost entirely to the exchange of incredible, fragrant, compressed bricks of aged tea. As the exhausted, deeply weathered, quiet caravans slowly, gratefully passed through the heavily shadowed, cool stone arches of the wall, they left behind a permanent, invisible, beautiful, aromatic legacy. The heavy, dark, enclosing stones of these specific ancient gates are said to have actually physically absorbed the deep, earthy, incredibly rich, comforting aroma of millions of pounds of fermented tea leaves passing through them over the long, quiet centuries. If you stand very still in the deep, resting shadows of these remote western arches and take a slow, deep breath of the cool, dry air, you can almost sense the faint, lingering, profoundly soothing scent of dark earth, aged timber, and warm, roasted tea. It is a deeply grounding, beautifully aromatic memory, completely transforming a heavy, defensive gate into a welcoming, warm, fragrant threshold of safe, peaceful passage and quiet, shared rest. As the landscape pushes gently, inevitably even further past those fragrant tea-soaked gates, venturing deeply into the vast, sweeping, arid, whispering infinity of the Gobi Desert, the very shape of the isolated watchtowers undergoes a profound, deeply philosophical and highly practical transformation. Throughout the heavily forested, steep eastern mountains, the towering heavy beacons are almost universally built as sharp, rigid, heavy, perfect squares, representing the stable, unyielding, solid element of the heavy earth. But out here, in the shifting, endless golden dunes where the fierce carrying winds can blow relentlessly for weeks, the ancient builders constructed massive, beautifully sweeping, perfectly round cylindrical towers. This elegant curving geometry was brilliantly, intelligently chosen so that the howling, abrasive, sand-filled winds would simply, effortlessly, slip right around the smooth, rounded surface, finding absolutely no sharp, resistant corners to slowly batter and destroy. But in ancient, quiet Chinese philosophy, the perfect, seamless circle also deeply represents the vast, endless, unbroken vault of the sky and the warm, resting sun. These lonely, towering, circular beacons standing completely alone in the vast, empty desert are deeply beautiful, architectural poems in the sand. They are smooth, earthly reflections of the quiet, sweeping, eternal heavens above, perfectly designed to beautifully, peacefully survive the harshest, most punishing storms, not by aggressively fighting them, but by gently, gracefully, and completely letting them pass seamlessly by. This profound, deep desire to harmoniously, peacefully yield to the massive natural forces of the environment governed the absolute underlying placement of the entire colossal structure. The Great Wall was not merely plotted by pragmatic, calculating, cold military engineers. Its sweeping, winding, continent-spanning path was deeply, heavily influenced by ancient, wise masters of feng shui. They viewed the massive, rolling, plunging mountain ranges not as dead, inert, unmoving rock, but as vast, living, breathing Long Mai, or dragon veins, the vital energy currents of the living earth. The architects were incredibly, deeply careful not to sever, puncture, or aggressively block these ancient, natural flowing lines of energy. Instead, they designed the heavy, grey stone fortifications to beautifully, smoothly ride exactly along the very crests of these veins, allowing the natural, vibrant qi, or continuous life force of the mountain, to flow freely, continuously, and peacefully right beneath the heavy foundations. The wall was intentionally, masterfully built to act as a supportive, heavy, protective spine that beautifully enhanced the Earth's natural energy, rather than an aggressive, arrogant cage that suppressed it. It is a stunning, deeply settling realization that the largest, heaviest, most monumental construction project in human history was ultimately completely guided by a profound, gentle desire to maintain absolute energetic harmony with the resting, breathing, magnificent Earth. That absolute resting harmony with the ancient Earth is perhaps most beautifully, quietly expressed in how the wall effortlessly marks the slow, graceful passing of the day for the people living in the deep valleys far below. Because the massive, heavy, square watchtowers are spaced so perfectly and rhythmically along the incredibly high, soaring eastern ridges, they function exactly like the enormous stone teeth of a colossal, mountain-sized sundial. As the bright, warm, golden sun slowly, majestically arcs across the vast blue sky, the towers cast immensely long, deep, cool, purple shadows that stretch for miles down into the sweeping, lush green valleys. For centuries, the quiet, patient, humble farmers tending to their terraced, flooded rice paddies didn't ever need to look at modern clocks. They simply watched the slow, inevitable, soothing progress of these massive, cooling shadows gliding silently, beautifully across the flooded fields. When the long, dark, cooling shadow of a specific, deeply familiar tower finally, softly touched the edge of the rushing river, it was the quiet, undeniable, gentle signal that the hard waking work of the day was finally completely over. The imposing heavy military structure was beautifully, seamlessly integrated into the quiet agrarian rhythm of peaceful, simple life. It became a comforting, massive, reliable timepiece, gently, silently guiding the whole tired valley toward the cool, restful, deeply deserved quiet of the softly approaching starry night. As that starry, velvet night slowly and beautifully gives way to the incredibly soft, pale lavender light of the early dawn, the shifting illumination reveals a section of the ancient architecture that appears to hold a completely different, almost magical temperature. High in the deeply rugged, fiercely wild mountains of Jiangku, the massive winding structure completely sheds its familiar, heavy, dark grey skin. Here, the brilliant ancient masons utilize the unique geology of the immediate surrounding peaks, constructing the entire soaring barrier out of massive blocks of locally quarried pure white dolomite. From a distance, even in the absolute sweltering humid height of the deep summer, this specific sweeping section of the wall creates a breathtaking, deeply cooling visual illusion. It looks exactly like a pristine, untouched, brilliant ribbon of fresh, heavy winter snow resting perfectly and permanently on the lush, emerald green ridges of the mountain. It is a profoundly calming, incredibly serene sight. The stark, crisp, brilliant white stone effortlessly cuts through the heavy green haze of the deep forest, providing a visual rush of pure, crisp, high-altitude coolness, a quiet, resting promise of the pure, clean air that waits patiently at the very top of the world. If you were to slowly climb to that pristine, cooling ridge and look directly down at the smooth, heavy stones directly beneath your resting feet, you would discover a brilliant, quiet layer of ancient tactile engineering designed entirely for absolute safety and perfect grip. On the absolute steepest, most dramatic, plunging inclines of the paved, elevated walkway, the flat, heavy granite slabs are meticulously rhythmically carved with thousands of shallow, perfectly parallel horizontal lines. This specific texture design is beautifully functionally known as the madao, or the horse track. These deliberate, incredibly precise shallow grooves were carved to gracefully, effectively catch the heavy, pooling water of sudden mountain downpours, instantly channeling it safely away to the edges. But more profoundly, they provide an incredibly secure, wonderfully tactile, unyielding grip for the heavy leather-wrapped boots of the ancient guards and the iron-shod hooves of their resting horses. Walking slowly up these deeply grooved, textured stones provides an unparalleled physical sensation of absolute, unshakable stability. Every single, slow step you take is perfectly caught, held, and deeply supported by the ancient rhythmic texture of the carved earth. A silent, structural guarantee that no matter how steep or challenging the upward path may seem, the heavy mountain will never, ever let you slip. Yet, despite that absolute, unshakable, deeply carved stability, the massive continent-spanning structure is not entirely rigidly frozen in place. It actually physically possesses a slow, quiet, magnificent biological rhythm of its own. Because it is built from millions of tons of natural elemental earth and heavy stone, the entire winding, thousands of miles long monument actively responds to the sweeping, changing temperatures of the passing year through a massive, invisible process of thermal expansion. In the deep, baking, golden heat of the long summer, the entire colossal structure gently, invisibly expands, stretching its heavy stone spine ever so slightly across the vast continent. When the freezing, bitter, deeply icy winds of the deep winter eventually return, the millions of heavy bricks and tightly packed earthen mounds softly, collectively contract, pulling themselves tightly inward against the cold. The Great Wall literally, physically breathes. It takes one massive, impossibly slow, deep, geological inhalation and exhalation every single year, moving and shifting in perfect, quiet harmony with the turning of the ancient earth. Just as that massive ancient stone takes its slow, deep, incredibly patient yearly breath, simply allow your own lungs to fill completely and effortlessly with the cool, quiet air of the room. The body naturally mirrors that deep, resting, unhurried rhythm. The heavy muscles grow slightly softer, the chest rises and falls with exactly the same predictable, effortless grace as the changing of the seasons, and your tired mind can simply, beautifully drift on the steady, carrying current of that profoundly peaceful breath. When the cool, crisp exhalation of the autumn season finally sweeps down across the grand, sweeping sections of Mutianyu and Badaling, it triggers one of the most breathtaking, vibrant, and deeply warming colour transformations in the natural world. The steep, plunging mountain slopes surrounding the heavy, grey resting fortifications are densely, heavily forested with massive groves of the ancient wild smoke tree. For a few incredibly brief, deeply precious weeks in the late golden fall, the small round leaves of these abundant trees completely shed their summer green and erupt into a vast, sweeping, almost blindingly vibrant ocean of deep crimson, burnt orange, and rich, glowing burgundy. The heavy, solemn, unmoving grey stone of the ancient wall suddenly appears to float weightlessly directly on top of a massive, rolling, fiery sea of incredibly soft, warm colour. The visual contrast is absolutely stunning and deeply, profoundly comforting. The harsh, austere, military severity of the ancient brickwork is completely, beautifully softened and warmly wrapped by the heavy, fiery, shedding blanket of the resting autumn forest, creating a sweeping, miles-long natural tapestry that perfectly, quietly celebrates the beautiful, necessary art of gracefully letting go. Deep within that quiet, resting, softly shedding autumn forest lies the lingering, invisible echo of the most profoundly human, deeply empathetic legend ever gently attached to these heavy stones. For centuries, the local people have passed down the quiet, beautiful story of Meng Jiangnu, a devoted, deeply loving woman who travelled for thousands of perilous miles through the bitter cold to bring warm, winter clothes to her husband, a labourer stationed at the distant, unfinished wall. Upon discovering he had already peacefully passed away from the deep exhaustion of the work, her pure, unadulterated, profound grief was so absolutely genuine, so incredibly deep, and so beautifully human that the ancient, unyielding earth itself could not bear the heavy weight of her tears. According to the quiet legend, a massive section of the rigid, heavy, unfeeling stone wall empathized completely with her pure devotion, softening instantly and collapsing gently to the earth to respectfully reveal his resting place. While historians view this as a deeply poetic myth, it holds a stunning, profoundly comforting, beautiful truth at its very core. The belief that pure, gentle, enduring human love is a force so incredibly powerful, so deeply resonant, and so vastly important that even the absolute hardest, heaviest, most immovable granite on the face of the earth will ultimately, quietly soften and yield to its grace. That beautiful, profound desire to provide warmth, deep comfort, and safe guidance to weary travellers completely transformed the terrifying, towering military architecture during the long, sweeping, incredibly quiet eras of deep imperial peace. During the height of the bustling, vibrant Silk Road trade, when the heavy threat of conflict had softly faded into the deep background, the massive, imposing signal towers in the far western, sweeping deserts completely, beautifully abandoned their harsh, warning fires of thick smoke and burning sulphur. Instead, the lonely stationed guards repurposed these towering, heavy, mud brick monoliths into a sprawling, continent-spanning string of gentle, inland lighthouses. In the deep, absolute, inky blackness of the vast, freezing desert night, they would carefully, patiently hoist massive, oversized, incredibly soft, glowing paper lanterns to the very tops of the highest earthen pavilions. For the exhausted, deeply weary merchants leading their heavy, chiming caravans through the blinding, trackless, silent dunes, the sudden, warm, soft amber glow of a distant lantern suspended high in the dark sky was the ultimate beautiful symbol of absolute safety, warm shelter, and imminent rest. The wall became a massive, thousands of miles long porchlight, lovingly, dependably left on in the dark, gently and quietly guiding the tired, wandering travellers safely back to the comforting embrace of home. You're moving safely and quietly toward that exact same warm, gentle amber light right now. There is absolutely no need to navigate, no need to watch the heavy path, and no need to carry the exhausting weight of the long journey anymore. The soft, guiding light of sleep is already clearly visible in the near distance, wrapping you entirely in a deeply protective, profoundly reassuring, warm embrace. Just let the quiet, steady rhythm of the journey carry you the rest of the way. If you were to follow that soft, guiding amber lantern light to the absolute definitive starting point of the ancient western fortifications, you would arrive at a deeply profound, breathtakingly solitary place, beautifully known as the First Abutment. Here, on the vast, sweeping, heavily wind-scalded plains of Shanhaiguan, the ancient golden rammed earth wall does not slowly taper off or gently fade into the sweeping sand. It marches with absolute heavy structural confidence right to the absolute terrifying edge of a sheer, plunging 80-meter deep canyon. At the very bottom of this massive, dark, deeply shadowed rift flows the wild, untamed, freezing, crystal-clear water of the Taolai River, born directly from the melting, ancient glaciers of the Kilian Mountains. Standing on the crumbling, heavy, golden earth of this absolute first solitary pier, you are suspended perfectly and beautifully between the vast, endless, silent infinity of the Gobi Desert and the deep, eternal, rushing, roaring sound of the moving water below. It is a place of profound, deeply settling beginnings, a quiet, immense, heavily anchored starting line that listens endlessly to the eternal liquid heartbeat of the deep earth, quietly proving that every single, unimaginably long, sprawling, continent-spanning journey must begin with one single, solitary, firmly planted step at the absolute edge of the known world. From that towering, solitary earthen cliff at the edge of the rushing river, the architectural story occasionally completely and beautifully reverses its entire orientation, sinking deeply and quietly into the soft, welcoming earth. Far out on the vast, rolling, endless green oceans of the Mongolian steppe, the brilliant engineers of the ancient Ming Dynasty realized that building a massive, towering, heavy stone wall in a landscape with absolutely no rock was a foolish, exhausting endeavour. Instead, they performed a massive, continent-spanning act of negative architecture. They dug an incredibly deep, sweeping, incredibly wide boundary trench, known softly as the Jiehao. Over the slow, passing, quiet centuries, nature has completely, lovingly reclaimed this massive, deep scar in the earth. The sunken, wide trench provided a perfect, deeply sheltered, beautifully damp microclimate that naturally caught the rolling, rare prairie rain. Today, this ancient boundary is completely invisible from a distance, having transformed entirely into a sunken, winding, deeply hidden, lush green river of incredibly tall, intensely vibrant, softly waving wild grasses and delicate, fragrant prairie flowers. It is an incredibly beautiful, deeply calming inversion of defensive power, a massive, thousands of miles long boundary made entirely of soft, rustling, living greenery, quietly offering a deep, sunken, hidden ribbon of thriving life, hidden perfectly within the vast, endless, sweeping golden plains. When the traditional heavy, stone-built sections of the wall encounter an almost vertically sheer, impossibly steep mountain face, where a normal ascending staircase would be agonizingly, punishingly steep, the ancient architects designed an incredibly elegant, beautifully soaring solution known poetically as the cloud ladder. In these breathtaking, dizzying sections, the heavy, smooth paving stones are not laid flat like jarring traditional steps. Instead, they are angled beautifully and smoothly to perfectly match the rising steep pitch of the mountain ridge, creating a continuous, unbroken, massive stone ramp that sweeps directly up into the sky. Because there are no sharp, rhythmic, jarring edges to constantly lift your heavy feet over, walking slowly up the cloud ladder feels remarkably, profoundly different from climbing. It creates a stunning, almost weightless physical sensation of smoothly, continuously gliding directly upward into the low-hanging white mountain mist. The heavy, exhausting physical impact of the climb is completely, beautifully erased by the brilliant, smooth, sweeping geometry of the stone, turning what should be an agonizing, exhausting struggle into a smooth, deeply meditative, perfectly continuous floating ascent into the quiet, cool, resting clouds. As you float smoothly and effortlessly up into that quiet, high-altitude embrace, the grand, sweeping, macro-level design of the massive structure reveals a hidden, breathtaking cosmic rhythm that completely, beautifully binds the heavy earth to the eternal turning of the sky. In certain, highly specific ancient military commanderies along the sweeping northern ridges, the brilliant architects did not just place their heavy, grey watchtowers at random, tactical intervals. They deliberately, meticulously, and beautifully constructed exactly 365 individual, massive stone pavilions within their specific sweeping jurisdiction. Every single, heavy, quiet, isolated tower was intentionally designed to perfectly, physically represent a single, passing day of the traditional solar year. The massive, winding military barrier was completely, conceptually transformed into an unimaginably vast, thousands of miles long, physical stone calendar, wrapping heavily and securely around the shoulders of the mountain. It is a stunning, deeply, profoundly reassuring, beautiful manifestation of absolute universal order. The heavy, unmoving ancient stones were deliberately patterned to completely honour and beautifully mirror the steady, predictable, unending, reliable cycle of time itself, creating a deeply reassuring, quiet promise built directly into the very architecture of the earth. A deeply reassuring promise that the turning of the earth will always, inevitably and gently guide us toward another quiet, peaceful dawn. As that gentle, predictable dawn finally breaks over the endless winding ridges, bringing its soft, pale light to the sleeping stones, we arrive quietly at the final, perhaps most profound, overarching truth of this colossal monument. For centuries, humanity simply guessed at the true, vast scale of the architecture, relying on ancient, fragmented scrolls and local whispered legends. It wasn't until the modern era, utilizing the silent, sweeping orbital paths of high-altitude satellites and years of incredibly patient, painstaking on-the-ground mapping, that the absolute exact measurement was finally quietly revealed to the world. The sprawling interwoven network of the Great Wall measures exactly 21,196 kilometers in length. But the most breathtaking, deeply comforting discovery to emerge from this massive, quiet survey was not the staggering length itself. It was the beautiful, undeniable realization of how much of the wall has completely, gracefully vanished. The scientists discovered that nearly a third of the ancient heavy fortifications have not been violently destroyed or aggressively torn down. They have simply, beautifully and completely been reabsorbed by the earth. The heavy fired bricks have slowly crushed back into soft, fertile soil. The towering rammed earth mounds have gently slumped into sweeping grassy hills, and the ancient sticky rice mortar has dissolved completely to feed the twisting, deep roots of the mountain pines. The ultimate final wonder of the Great Wall is that it is no longer truly a wall at all. It has achieved the absolute perfect pinnacle of architectural and philosophical harmony. It has peacefully, entirely become the mountain itself. It stands as a massive, continent-spanning, quiet testament to the beautiful reality that the greatest, heaviest, most ambitious things we carry or build do not need to stand rigidly forever. Their ultimate, most peaceful purpose is to simply, gently dissolve, softly returning all of their gathered energy back into the quiet, eternal, resting embrace of the natural world. The long, incredible journey across those thousands of winding miles is now beautifully, completely finished. The vast, sweeping mountains, the deep, rushing rivers, and the endless, whispering deserts have shared their ancient, quiet secrets. And now, they're all settling deeply and heavily into the silent dark. There is absolutely no need for you to hold on to any of these distant places. You do not need to remember the heavy grey bricks, the golden shifting sands, or the soft swaying branches of the willow trees. Let all of those intricate details gently drift away, washing smoothly from your tired mind exactly like the soft ancient mortar, slowly dissolving in the gentle, cooling mountain rain. The heavy work is entirely done. The ancient guards have left their lonely posts. The chiming, silken caravans have safely reached their distant homes, and the vast, sweeping structure is completely at peace. You can feel that exact same deep, heavy peace settling firmly and comfortably into the very center of your own body. Feel the gentle weight of the space around you, resting softly against you, just like the quiet, insulating snow covering the northern ridges. The muscles in your shoulders and back are entirely soft, completely surrendering their heavy, waking grip to the warm, supportive gravity beneath you. Your breathing is slow, it is rhythmic, it is incredibly deep, rising and falling with the exact, effortless, gentle tempo of the sleeping earth. The world outside this quiet room has faded completely away, leaving only a vast, soft, comforting stillness. There is nothing left to build. There is nothing left to defend. There is nowhere else you need to be. The heavy, protective stones of the ancient past are standing silently in the distance, keeping the rushing, chaotic world entirely at bay, ensuring that your own quiet space is perfectly, absolutely secure. The mind is entirely clear. The body is beautifully heavy. The night is vast and welcoming. Everything is perfectly still. Everything is completely safe. Just let go. Sink deeper into the quiet. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.